These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabi.com. Gabi takes the pain out of insurance shopping. More info at Gabi.com/Thom. Bowl and Branch Sheets, crafted for the common good. More info at bowlandbranch.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. And Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more information, teethhealth.com, code TOM.
Today's book in our book club is The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, by this guy, Thom Hartmann. This is from chapter 1, or from the introduction, actually. In 2016, 6% of Americans who were eligible to vote nominated Donald Trump as the GOP's presidential candidate. It was 8% for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. Trump went on to be elected president by 26% of eligible voters. The modern American oligarchs have largely stayed in power using three simple elements: explicit and overt racism, massive disinformation campaigns, and voter suppression. No ideas, no push for better schools, hospitals, airports, roads, or bridges, or reform of our health, energy, or financial systems. No promise of more and better jobs. None of these staples of past presidential campaigns can be found in pretty much any Republican advertising today. Instead, the public Republican message is all about race, or the subset of race, religion. Muslim stands in for brown Arab in GOP speak, and immigration, aka brown people from south of our border, and socialism. Meanwhile, Republican secretaries of state across the nation are vigorously purging voters from the rolls. Over 17 million, more than 10% of America's active voters, in just the 2016-2018 period, according to NBC News. After the After the 5 Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, 14 GOP-controlled states moved within a year, some within days, to restrict access to the vote, particularly for communities of color, students, and retired people. In North Carolina, for example, 158 polling places were permanently closed in the 40 counties with the most African-American voters just before the 2016 election, leading to a 16% decline in African-American early voting in that state. An MIT study found that nationwide, Hispanic voters wait 150% longer in line than white voters, and black voters can expect to wait 200% longer in line to vote. In Indiana, then Governor Mike Pence's new rigorous voter ID law caused an 11.5% drop in African-American voting. Students are suing for their right to vote, and retired people who no longer drive but care passionately about their Social Security and Medicare are being turned away at the polls by the hundreds of thousands because their driver's licenses have expired. The obvious failure of 40-plus years of Reaganomics and GOP policies to maintain a functional middle class in America has been a problem for the modern GOP. In 1974, for example, the GOP had outright control of only 7 states. The message, elect us and we'll help the rich people, just didn't generally resonate with American voters. It's the reason why, outside of the fluke elections of 46 and 52, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives outright for 3 generations, from 1933 to 1996, and controlled the Senate for most of that time. Desperate to win the presidency for the GOP in 1968, Richard Nixon went so far as to commit treason by torpedoing a peace deal with President Lyndon Johnson that President Lyndon Johnson had worked out with the North and South Vietnamese. According to Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, then president of Iran, Ronald Reagan did the same thing by cutting a deal with Iran whereby they would hold on to the U.S. embassy hostages until after the 1980 presidential election, torpedoing Jimmy Carter's chances of re-election. But in 2000, the GOP changed tactics. After Reagan was almost busted for his part in Iran-Contra, he testified that he had forgotten about details of the program more than 80 times. His growing Alzheimer's spared him an indictment. They realized that getting busted for treason wasn't worth the risk. They needed a plan B, and it was deliciously simple. If most voters don't like what you're selling, then just don't let them vote. Paul Weyrich promoted this idea back in 1980 when he was campaigning for Reagan after co-founding the Heritage Foundation. And indeed, many Republican luminaries, such as William Rehnquist, who went from serving the GOP by standing in polling places and intimidating Hispanic and Native American voters in the 1960s, to becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, rose up through the ranks by participating in Republican-run voter intimidation schemes. Voter suppression became the foundational go-to tactic for the GOP in 2000. Although the GOP attacked Democratic presidential nominee Al Gore with smear and innuendo, ridiculing him for helping write the legislation that created the modern internet, for example, the main thing that got George W. Bush into the White House was voter suppression. His brother, Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and Bush's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, threw somewhere between 20,000 and 90,000 African-American voters off the rolls. They were able to get the vote close enough. The 5 Republican appointees to the Supreme Court functionally awarded Bush the presidency. The BBC covered this in 2001 in 2 major investigative reports that were seen all over the world, except on any American media. By 2016, the Republican Party had fine-tuned its voter suppression and intimidation systems to the point that they ran like well-oiled machines in nearly 30 states. Between the 2012 and 2016 presidential elections, for example, Ohio had purged more than 2 million voters from its rolls, the vast majority, more than 2 to 1, in heavily African-American and Hispanic counties. The 5 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that they could keep it up. And other states have since adopted their new tactic of caging voters. The book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, by me.
We say fight back!
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, 2 weeks and a day or two. We have this business week, or this week, next week, and then the following Tuesday is Election Day. We really need to start characterizing the following week or two as Election Week, given such a large percentage of the vote is happening by mail this year. And it's going to take some states. Most states have laws that allow them to start counting the ballots that come in by mail before the official election day. But there are a few states where Republicans have succeeded historically or recently in passing laws or rules that say you can't even open those ballots until election day, which means that it's going to take, days, maybe even weeks to count all the ballots. This, of course, is part of their plan. And by the way, for our program today, Kevin Kamps will be here with us in our second hour about more Fukushima water being released into the Pacific Ocean and some really funky stuff going on with a couple of reactors in Michigan that I think are worth shining a spotlight on. And Professor David Vine will be with us in the third hour of our program today. He's got a new book out, The United States of War, and very thought-provoking and some very important stuff in there. But COVID infections now represent the third leading cause of death in America. This is a very contagious, very crippling, very deadly disease. And on top of that, there's a growing legion of people who call themselves long haulers. These are people who are suffering, basically the symptoms never went away. One of them said, every afternoon at 4 o'clock, I get hit by a truck again. Literally couldn't get out of bed for weeks and now can barely get out of bed. Screaming nerve pain,
difficulty breathing, chronic fatigue. And that doesn't count the COVID survivors who have now permanent lung damage, heart damage, brain damage, kidney damage, have had strokes, have had heart attacks. These are the most common side effect of COVID is not death. Yeah, it happens around 3% of the time. But the most common side effect are those things that I just described. Heart attacks, strokes, and things like that. And very often people do die from them. You know, the latest estimate is that there's probably about 60 or 70,000 deaths in the United States in the last 8 months that were not listed as COVID deaths because, you know, when the EMTs showed up, the person was dead, and they said, well, what are the symptoms? And, well, you know, the left side of his body froze up, and then he couldn't move, and then he couldn't talk, and then, you know, an hour later he died. Or, you know, he grabbed his chest and was having all this pain and fell to the floor and died. Well, it turns out that the stroke and the heart attack were actually caused by COVID. So, facing this simple reality, every developed country in the world is encouraging social distancing and the use of masks to reduce the number of people who are injured, disabled, or killed by this disease. Every country, of course, except the United States of America. And now we've got this coronavirus. It is exploding through the American Midwest. And it's increasingly looking like the thing that spread it across the Midwest was that South Dakota biker convention where 500,000 bikers showed up in one small town in South Dakota. And the governor came out and said, hey, we don't need masks. I think Kristi Noem is her name. No, we don't need masks. It's all good. Don't worry. And all the restaurants open and everybody. And after all the bikers left, you know, the town came down with COVID. And those bikers have COVID. And they carried it 500,000 people all over the country. This would have been illegal in pretty much any other state. In fact, the bikers and the Trump rallies are the only, quote, legal, large, maskless events that are going on in the United States. And Trump is like spreading this virus from coast to coast because he wants his ego massaged. He loves those rallies. This is his last chance to have rallies. He loves it when people tell him how much they love him. All those people yelling and screaming. It's what he's dreamed about his whole entire life. And here, and you know, in some bizarre way, he thinks it's going to help him win the election, too. You know, there are psychologists, in fact, Dr. Justin Frank, a professor of psychiatry, he's a psychiatrist at Georgetown University, on this program have speculated that Trump might actually be intentionally exposing his followers to this deadly virus, because deep down inside, he actually hates anybody who trusts him. There was a time in his life, probably when he was 5, 6, 7 years old, according to his niece, Mary, and to Dr. Frank. There was a time in his life when, as a young child, he was very trusting. And then he discovered that he couldn't trust the people around him. He couldn't trust his father. He couldn't trust his mother. He couldn't trust his siblings. He lived in a predatory family, a family where the patriarch, his father, Fred Trump, was a high-functioning sociopath. And so now anybody who trusts him, he immediately assumes at some real deep unconscious level must be up to something. And so, you know, hey, infect them. This is how he treated all 3 of his first wives, having affairs on all of them and you know, betraying repeatedly. I mean, we know of, you know, at least, 10 or 15 just on Melania, just in the couple of years after she gave birth to their son. And what did Melania say? Well, I know who I married. I married him for the money. I mean, it's pretty clear, right? So, but the point is that this is how Donald Trump behaves. He's got several thousand people who've sued him for breaking business contracts. Contracts are supposed to be your word written down so everybody is clear. Donald Trump's word doesn't mean anything. So maybe it's this like deep psychology thing that's the reason why he's trying to, you know, the Trump death train, the Trump death tour. Why he's insisting on running this the way he is running it and discouraging people from wearing masks so they will get sick. You know, maybe it's that deep psychology. Or maybe it's just that he's lazy. He wants to spend all his time, as he has for the first 3.5 years of his presidency, 3 3/4 years now. He wants to spend all his time watching Fox News and playing golf and doesn't want to attend to the actual hard work of governing. And so, Scott Atlas, the radiologist from Fox News who knows nothing about infectious diseases, comes along and says, well, just to go for herd immunity. Yeah, that worked really well with smallpox, didn't it? No, it didn't. How about measles? No, it didn't. How about polio? No, it didn't. In fact, no infectious disease in the history of humanity has ever been dealt with herd immunity. Herd immunity is a phrase that the vaccine industry came up with decades ago to describe the threshold you have to hit of vaccination before you no longer have to worry about a disease being active. And for measles, for example, it's 94%. If your vaccination rate with measles goes below 94%, you start having outbreaks. So God only knows what the herd immunity level is for COVID, particularly since people are getting it a second time. But here we go. And now you've got some political cynics saying that here's a third reason why Trump is trying to spread this virus as far and wide as he can. To hand Joe Biden a screaming, flaming disaster. It's like, the old cliche of the teenagers who fill a bag with dog poop, set it on your front step, and then light the bag on fire. I mean, that's what Donald Trump is trying to give to Joe Biden when he comes into office. In fact, he went out of his way yesterday to say, if Biden gets elected, he's going to listen to the scientists. Oh, my God. I mean, that's his indictment of Joe Biden. He's going to listen to the scientists. But more Americans have died from this disease than have died in all our wars since World War II combined. And under, in any normal circumstances, that would disqualify any normal politician. Inciting people to kill others? That could even land most Americans in prison. So how do we deal with this after the election? Truth and Reconciliation Commission? Do we go to the Church Committee or the Pike Committee in the House of Representatives, like we did after the Nixon administration? How do we deal with this? Your thoughts after this?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Because we have to deal with this. We cannot afford to allow this to happen again. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Jessica in Chicago. Hey, Jessica, what's on your mind today? Hello? I've got Jessica on hybrid 1. I'm not hearing Jessica, though.
Uh-oh. Hello?
Hey, Jessica. Now I can hear you.
Oh, good. Can you hear me now? Oh, this is strange.
Yes, I can. What's up?
Oh, good. My husband was checking online where coronavirus hotspots were. He does that. And we looked at Pennsylvania. Our daughters live there. And the hotspot was in the middle of the state, Huntington County. So I said, I bet Trump held a rally there. He said, oh, no, you think so negative. So I went online. And Trump's Huntington County rally for the police, it was a police rally, had thousands of people crowded together as usual, and I showed them. And everywhere the evil thing holds his rallies are where the deaths are high. And should these rallies just be called death rallies? It was all lit up red.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to start calling them that, death rallies or the death train or something. I mean, we need to come up with a name for this, but this is what's going on. Donald Trump is inviting people to come and die. Come and get exposed to a deadly virus. If it doesn't give you a stroke or a heart attack or leave you permanently crippled or disabled, it might kill you. And maybe nothing will happen. Half the people who get it have no symptoms. The other half have big problems. But hey, come on by. Yeah, death rallies.
I like it.
So, Jessica, thank you. Did you look at any other cities or any other areas, or was that just in Pennsylvania?
Well, I have something very important.
Or are you just starting?
Your listeners, one of them called and said that her niece had a miscarriage. Well, my friend's niece had a miscarriage, lives in Georgia. Both of them had COVID. She was pregnant,
Right.
and she could not stop throwing up. She was only 4 months old. I mean, the baby was only 4 months, and she couldn't stop throwing up and had a miscarriage, and the baby moved and then died right in front of her. So these pregnant women that have COVID, your program is the only one that tells what's going on in the news. I don't understand why prime time is just focused on what they want to be, and they don't really tell news that's important.
I think they are so tired of or afraid of Trump attacking them for telling the truth. And I mean, Trump had this meeting with his campaign team yesterday. It's over at the top of rawstory.com right now, where he was calling Fauci an idiot and saying he wants to get out and do more of these. I mean, this is just absolutely nuts. But this is what's going on. And when we look at what we did after the Nixon scandals, I think that we need to consider something like that, or a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, or federal prosecutors. But, we've got to hold these guys to account. I'm not sure the best way to do it, but, they have been engaging in behavior that is causing death and destruction and miscarriages and disabilities and frankly, terror across America. Jessica, thank you for that. Thank you for that. That's a fascinating, look into what's going on. Hopefully, some of our major newspapers, the LA Times, the New York Times, the Washington Post, will be looking into these kinds of stories because, this is just evil stuff. We'll be right back. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So what makes Trump supporters? I do a deep dive on these on our video over at thomhartmann.com for the supporters of our program today. But here's essentially what it says. Number one, they are authoritarians, by and large authoritarian followers. They want a strong father figure to make them feel safe. Number two, social dominance orientation. They believe in a caste system and they think they should be in the top caste. Number three, prejudice. They view people of other races poorly. Number four, intergroup contact. Most of them have never experienced significant contact with people of another race or people, deeply different than them. And number five, relative deprivation. They feel like they've been screwed. They're not sure why. And Trump tells them, oh, it's those brown people. It's all over at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Let me just dig a little bit deeper into this before I pick up your phone calls. In the Richard Nixon administration, Nixon got off because he was pardoned by Jerry Ford. I frankly do not see Joe Biden pardoning Donald Trump. I think it's entirely possible that in the last, if Trump loses the election, that in the last couple of weeks before he leaves office, he will resign and Mike Pence will pardon him. I think that's entirely possible. And maybe Pence will pardon all the people who, in his administration, who have been engaging in these, what I would say are crimes against democracy at the very least. And, we'll have to wait and see how that shakes out. But 22 members of the Nixon administration were convicted of crimes after Watergate. 22 of them. Most of them went to prison, including his chief of staff, who right now is Mark Meadows. This was Nixon's chief of staff. It was Haldeman. And his attorney general. Back then it was George Mitchell. And now, you got Bill Barr. Those are the, among the folks who went to prison. And then the Senate convened a committee that Senator Frank Church, who if I'm remembering correctly, was a Republican from Idaho, I may be wrong on that, but in any case, Senator Frank Church chaired the committee in the Senate, and Congressman Pike chaired the committee in the House, and they looked into what was going on and issued some rather startling reports and recommendations for legislation that could prevent this kind of stuff from happening again, which Congress largely followed. And then the Supreme Court struck down in 1976 once Lewis Powell got on the court with lots of big money and all that kind of stuff. And so here we are. So what do we do? Eric Swalwell, the congressman from California who was on the Judiciary Committee who argued for impeachment, he says we need a presidential crimes commission. Others are calling for a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Jill Laporte, a Washington Post columnist, wrote a piece about this, calling for this. I mean, it's been, what, 60, 70 years since, the 1970s? What is that? Yeah, something in that neighborhood anyway. Since we last had this experiment, let's have a conversation about that too. What do we do? The Washington Post, by the way, is reporting that Deborah Birx has begged Trump to fire Scott Atlas, the quack doctor from Fox News who is now in charge of the coronavirus response at the federal level. He's basically he's holding meetings where he doesn't even invite Fauci and Birx. He sits at the head of the table. He's running things. Again, this guy is a radiologist. He has no experience in infectious diseases. He has never worked in public health in his whole entire life. He's taken charge of this. And Trump has put him there because he's advocating this herd immunity theory that allows Trump to do absolutely nothing but play golf, watch TV, and do rallies. And I think that that's probably 90% of the reason why Trump finds this so appealing. In fact, Dr. Atlas, I hesitate to call him doctor, quack Dr. Atlas, and Donald Trump, the White House, are sitting on $9 billion. Big conversation right now about, Nancy Pelosi just set a deadline of tomorrow for the White House and McConnell in the Senate to agree on a package. McConnell is saying, no. We're Republicans. No money for people, no money for states, no money for cities and municipalities, no money for police and fire. No. We do want protection from liability for big employers, and we want more money for the big companies. And we want more tax breaks for billionaires. You realize there was a $5 trillion tax break in the CARES Act? I mean, it's breathtaking. It was even bigger than the original Trump tax break. But anyhow, they're sitting on $9 billion. The White House is sitting on $9 billion specifically earmarked by Congress for expanding testing and refusing to let it out. It has been 156 days since the House of Representatives passed the HEROES Act, a $3 trillion bill that would have given money to the states, that would have given everybody in the country $600 a week. It has been 156 days, a half a year, since the House of Representatives passed this law, and Mitch McConnell refuses to even have a conversation about it in the Senate. It's been 19 days now since the House passed a compromised $2.2 trillion bill, which McConnell is also refusing to take up. And by the way, in this last negotiation, the White House removed 55% of the HEROES language for testing, tracing, and treatment. Right. And then when we come back from the break, I just have to tell you this shocking, two quick things, and then I'll pick up all your phone calls. But number one, this Hunter Biden laptop. It's an amazing story. And number two, what's up with text messages? This is fascinating. The New York Times had it, the Washington Post had it, but neither of them put two and two together. I will do that here on this program and inform you about this, and then we'll pick up your calls. What do we do to prevent this kind of criminality from ever happening again?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's the place where we dare to ask, is Walmart a person? And dare to say, no, not a chance. Forget it. We'll be right back.
Our book for the Thom Hartmann Book Club today is A Nation Forged by Crisis, A New American History by Jay Sexton. And I'm reading from the introduction. This is page 9. The quest for national security and global power, America's shifting position in the international economy, and fluctuations in immigration have made the United States the nation that it is today. Americans' foreign relations have conditioned its history not only in their cumulative effects over the long haul, but also as a result of their volatility. In periods of crisis, America's position in the world has lurched in unexpected directions. For as inexorable as the rise of the United States appears in retrospect, there have been contingent moments in which the very existence of our nation was up for grabs. This is the essence of crisis. The world turned upside down, the known replaced by the unknown, panic reigning as people struggle to maintain their balance and shifts in the very ground beneath their feet. It came with a speed and ferocity that left men dazed, New York Times correspondent Elliot Bell wrote of Wall Street's catastrophic collapse in October of 1929. Quote, the market seemed like an insensate thing that was wreaking a wild and pitiless revenge upon those who thought to master it, end quote. Crises are contagious, spreading like viruses from one realm to another. It's not without reason that the word crisis was associated with medical conditions and health scares in the 19th century. Each of the periods under consideration in this book were less a singular crisis than a set of interlinked crises. A political crisis could trigger an economic panic, which in turn could intensify social conflict, and so on. As these pandemics spread through the body politic, crisis itself was normalized, becoming an almost accepted characteristic of an age. Just as foreign crises have spread to the United States, domestic ones have spilled across its borders, unsettling foreign countries and peoples, as well as reconfiguring America's connections to the world. Consider the fateful winter of secession that followed the 1860 election of Abraham Lincoln. The crisis over slavery that divided the Union into warring sections that led to a series of sharp reversals in America's position in the global system. The foreign capital that had rushed into the roaring American economy in the preceding decades suddenly began to flee. Indeed, more capital left the United States in 1860 to 1862 than came into it. Also a once-in-a-century occurrence. One of the world's most valuable commodities and America's largest exports, southern cotton, was confined to the ports of the Confederacy as a result of Richmond's ill-fated diplomatic strategy, leading to unemployment and social unrest in the British textile town of Lancashire. The most unexpected reversal was how the national security that the United States had attained after the war against Mexico in the 1840s was suddenly imperiled, with European powers encroaching once again upon the Western Hemisphere. Meanwhile, the Confederate emissaries across the Atlantic were in search of alliance with Britain. Our country, Secretary of State William Seward lamented in early 1861, after having expelled all European powers from the continent, now threatened to relapse into an aggravated form of its colonial experience, and like India, Turkey, China, and Italy, become the theater of transatlantic intervention and rapacity. A wider view of American history that looks beyond the nation's borders brings into focus not only the migration patterns, economic flows, and international rivalries that have connected the United States to the world, but also those rare moments in which the very existence of the nation was in question. Perhaps none was more pregnant with implications than the autumn of 1877, when the fate of the Patriots' bid for independence hung in the balance. Having proclaimed their independence to the world the previous 4th of July, their cause had stalled on the battlefield and in the diplomatic courts of the old world. I think the game is pretty near up, Washington privately confessed at year's end. To accomplish their independence is not quite so easy as to declare it, the British philosopher Jeremy Bentham haughtily remarked. But then a series of events forever changed the course of modern history. The stunning Patriot victory at the Battle of Saratoga in October, the drafting of the Articles of Confederation in November that, for all its limitations, further demonstrated the political resolve of the Americans. And most of all, the alliance signed with France in February 1778, which provided the Patriots with the resources, military assistance, and naval power that ultimately tipped the scales in their favor. There are comparable Saratoga moments in other crises in U.S. history, as we shall see. These contingent moments played out in their own distinctive ways, but are joined by a common denominator that has been curiously forgotten in our age of U.S. global power. Foreign states and people have played decisive roles in the critical moments of American history. As we make our way through our own era of global instability, in an unprecedentedly interconnected world, there's perhaps no more important lesson from the past to keep in mind. Crisis may beget crisis, Franklin Roosevelt said as his administration transitioned from battling the Great Depression to entering the Second World War. But the progress underneath does not wholly halt. It does go forward, end quote. Like so many of Roosevelt's public statements, this one reveals a truth even as it conceals others. The United States came out on the other side of its greatest crises as a stronger and more efficiently organized nation, as Roosevelt suggested. The process of mobilizing resources to counter threats catalyzed innovations in political economy, such as the creation of a national financial system during the Civil War, and the economic reforms of the New Deal. The book is A Nation Forged by Crisis by Jay Sexton.
On the Science Revolution this week, there is more news from the Republican death cult. We need to start calling things what they are. The Republican Party is a death cult. Brian Felton drops by on why dangerous forever chemicals are still allowed in America's drinking water. Professor Richard Wolff will be talking about how and why capitalism failed to protect us from COVID-19. And in Geeky Science, Trump makes the case for Medicare for all. Tune in for the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So in our first half hour, I was laying out, basically the scope of death that Donald Trump is promoting. In fact, we had a caller during the break who has kids in Pennsylvania, and she was looking at the map of infections in Pennsylvania, and it seems to be spiking around one particular county. So she looked up Donald Trump and the name of that county, and sure enough, 3-4 weeks ago, he held a rally there, and now that county is like melting down with infections. So do we do a Truth and Reconciliation Commission like South Africa did? Do we do a Presidential Crimes Commission like Eric Swalwell is proposing? Does the Justice Department get involved? Do we have congressional inquiries like after Watergate? We had the Church Committee in the Senate and the Pike Committee in the House. How do we do this? I say all of the above as a starting point. But it's not just Donald Trump. It's the people who have been empowering him. It's the people who have been going along with him. It's the people who have been voting with him. It's the Republicans in the Senate who voted to keep him in office after it was very clear that he was soliciting foreign aid to win an election. Actually, not even soliciting foreign aid. He was blackmailing, extorting, threatening a foreign government in exchange for assistance. But anyhow, I told you I was going to tell you about a texting thing that was pretty mind-boggling. Let me just share two stories with you very quickly. One from the New York Times, the other from the Washington Post. This is the New York Times. In mid-September, parents of students at Corner Canyon High School in an affluent suburb of Salt Lake City received a text message urging them to beg the school board to keep classrooms open. 3 weeks into the school year, the number of coronaviruses at the Corner Canyon was rising, and the district was considering shifting to online instruction. After parents flooded the board with messages, this being the result of these text messages that they all received, the school stayed open. And within a week, the number of cases had nearly quadrupled, and a teacher was hospitalized and put on a ventilator. So that's the New York Times, or the Washington Post. Here's the New York Times. On a Friday in mid-September, Sunny Washington, this is the name of a mother in Salt Lake City, Sunny Washington got a text from another mother at her daughter's high school in an affluent suburb of Salt Lake City. 3 weeks into the school year, the number of coronavirus cases at the school was rising, and the district was considering shifting to online instruction. The text urged parents to beg the school board to keep classrooms open. Ms. Washington ignored the text. She thought the schools should be taking advice from public health experts, not parents. But other parents flooded the school board with messages, and the school stayed open. Within a week, the number of cases had nearly quadrupled. So two different stories, two different newspapers. And what's so interesting is that these stories, these were from Friday, as I recall, from the Friday newspapers. And on the 17th, which was Saturday, I got this email from Adam Brandon of FreedomWorks. FreedomWorks, of course, the group that the Koch brothers helped bring into existence years ago and that led the whole Tea Party movement. that created these AstroTurf tea parties, rented buses, moved people around, get your government hands off my Medicare, all that kind of stuff, to stop Obamacare. And this is Dear Barney Rubble. There's so much going on right now with everything on the line for freedom's future. Between the final stretch before November 3rd and the Supreme Court confirmation, we're knee-deep in things to do. Today, I wanted to be sure that I filled you in on some of the recent grassroots impact and trainings your support makes possible. Grassroots Texting Army. Remember, I just shared 2 stories of 2 cities where parents received text messages saying, don't let the school board go to remote learning. Keep the schools open. Back to FreedomWorks. FreedomWorks staff conducted 5 more online trainings this week, preparing activists for our powerful peer-to-peer texting mobilization platform. After a total of nearly 60 of these trainings, our grassroots texting army is shaping up to have a huge impact. In fact, our activists sent more than 1 million text messages in just 4 days. Again, this is FreedomWorks. This is the originally Koch-funded, founded, whatever, organization that brought us the Tea Party. They're at it again. Back to the email. Peer-to-peer texting gives us the ability to mobilize hundreds of thousands of freedom-loving Americans at a moment's notice, literally at the push of a button. So they no longer have to rent buses for Tea Partiers. Now they just send out text messages. I find that extremely mind-boggling. And, another one of these stories that is being completely missed by the media because they're not on FreedomWorks mailing list. And so they're like, gee, these text messages seem to be coming out of nowhere. No, they're not coming out of nowhere. And then finally, there's the Hunter Biden laptop story. And then I'm going to pick up your calls. Let me just share this with you. This has been going around. I've seen it on Facebook. Somebody emailed it to me, but I've seen it probably a dozen times in the last week. And it's a pretty good summary, actually. This is the Hunter Biden story. And just tell me if this makes sense, right? This is what Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani are trying to sell to us right now. Hunter Biden, who lives in Los Angeles, decides to fly 3,000 miles across the country to drop off 3 MacBook Pros at a repair shop run by a blind guy who charges the insanely low price of $85. He gets off the plane and drunk drives to the repair shop because there are no computer repair shops in Los Angeles. He drops them off, signs a contract for the repair, and then disappears. The repair shop owner is actually blind. He's actually legally blind. He can see shapes, but, can't read. So the blind repair shop owner somehow reads Hunter's private emails, a few of which mention a possible meeting with his dad, and is so alarmed he contacts the FBI. The FBI arranges to pick up the hard drives, but the computer repair shop owner, takes the totally normal step of copying those hard drives. And once he realizes that the FBI isn't going to do anything about it, he calls up the most credible ex-mayor on earth, Rudy Giuliani, and says, hey, here's the contents of these hard drives. That totally credible ex-mayor sits on these hard drives for 3 months, then chooses to release them 3 weeks before the election. The mainstream media says, hey, Mayor, can you independently verify these? And Giuliani says, what are you kidding? The Dell News Journal did an interview with this owner, the blind guy who owns the computer repair shop on the East Coast, that Hunter Biden apparently flew all the way to the East Coast just to drop off his laptops to get them repaired and then flew back to Los Angeles to wait. And this guy says that the FBI called him and asked him for help hacking the laptop. So the FBI needs the help from a blind mom-and-pop repair shop owner to hack a laptop. Seriously? This is what these people believe? Actually, I guess if they believe that Democrats are drinking the blood of children as some sort of fountain of eternal youth, they'll believe anything. And this is how bizarre it is. And it's being amplified by things like the Des Moines Sun, the Ann Arbor Times, Empire State Today. Sounds like newspapers, right? They are 3 of 1,300 phony newspaper websites that are all propagating Republican lies and disinformation, according to a new investigative report from the New York Times. Brian Tipone, a Texas brand management consultant and conservative Chicago radio personality, apparently owns a whole lot of these. And they offer an advertising package for $2,000. You can get 5 articles on one of these so-called local newspapers and unlimited news releases. Isn't that sweet? Okay, let's pick up your phone calls here. Nathan in West Los Angeles. Hey, Nathan, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. I just wanted to tell you 100% on the herd immunity thing. My wife is a PhD virologist, and I've been hearing what you said for 6 months now. Every time someone mentions it, it drives her nuts that people don't understand that herd immunity.
So, you want to recap
really
what I said, or
thing.
shall I, Nathan? For people who might have just tuned in.
Well, you did a fantastic job of it, but yeah, basically herd immunity, it's not a real thing. The Earth has been here for 4 billion years. Life on Earth has been here for almost 4 billion years. Humans have been around for 200,000 years. There's a gazillion things out there that can infect us that are constantly evolving around us. And it's a delicate ecosystem. Of course, this can launch you into a whole bigger discussion about the organism of the Earth and the environment of the Earth. But basically, herd immunity, it's not a real thing. Colds, the flu virus,
It has, if I can interject anything, there's a little bit of latency. I'm sorry if I came in on top of you.
No worries.
I thought I was jumping in. But, it has literally never worked. Syphilis took down the Roman army. Right? Herd immunity didn't help. Gonorrhea is still killing people. Herd immunity doesn't help. Smallpox was killing people right up until the smallpox vaccine was developed. Herd immunity never helped. Measles, you got to get 94% vaccination rates before you have herd immunity for measles. Herd immunity is a phrase that is only applied to vaccines. It has never worked with a wild virus or a wild bacteria ever in the history of the human race, as you are pointing out, Nathan, and it will not work now. You got the final 15 seconds, Nathan.
One more thing in for the break. I think what exacerbates it with my wife is she's from Taiwan, where they have universal health care. And it's an amazing system, and it works really well. I've been there, I've experienced it, and so I think you couple that with some of the misunderstandings here, and her head really explodes.
Spot on. And Taiwan has the best healthcare system in the world. Nathan, thank you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
45 minutes past the hour. Truth and Reconciliation Commission, Presidential Crimes Commission. What do we do? And welcome back. Let's see here. Wow, yeah, a lot of calls from all over the country. Ron in San Diego. Hey, Ron, what's on your mind? Thanks for watching Free Speech TV.
I'm concerned about the suppression of the vote and the states possibly not even submitting the correct votes or not even submitting votes. The whole canvas of things that can go wrong. I would like to see somebody try to galvanize the professional baseball or football players to threaten to boycott any state that does such things. And maybe somebody, I understand yesterday Schwarzenegger brought up, his opposition to it. Maybe somebody can get through to him and he could call the right people to get something done. It's getting late to do it, but it would be nice if we can fight against it. Maybe you should call somebody.
I'm with you. This, what's going on here is just a crime of epic proportions with regard to the election. Spot on, Ron. Thank you very much. Stephen in Portsmouth, Virginia. Hey, Stephen, what's up?
Hey, what's going on, Tom?
Hi.
All right. I just want to shine the light on something. You know how Trump kept going around saying that he saved millions of lives because he had the early shutdown from China?
Right, although it was incomplete. 40,000 people came in after he shut down China, but yeah.
Right, and another thing, again, I was thinking that because of his racism, he kept saying that this is the China virus. The mainstream of the virus came from Europe. So the fact that his racism stopped from closing the back door, he was so focused on trying to paint China as like the China virus. He forgot to close the travel for Europe, which has put us in the situation that we are now. So I just want to shine a light on that because a lot of people are not talking about that.
Yeah, it's a great point, Stephen. And I think it was Goebbels who said that every great lie has a grain of truth at its center, or words to that effect. And there's a grain of truth at the center. The virus did originate with bats in China, apparently near Wuhan. And China did mishandle the first few weeks of this. But they got it locked down, they figured it out, and now they don't have coronavirus in China. I mean, they've got some problems up on the northwestern border with Russia. They've got a town that's got some. And in their million-person prison camp where they've got all the Uyghurs, apparently they're having some problems with coronavirus. And there's even speculation that they're allowing that to happen so they can test vaccines there. But outside of that, life is back to normal in Wuhan. Life is back to normal in most of China. The factories are running, people are shopping, they're going to the stores, the schools are open, because the virus has been stopped, just like they stopped SARS, just like they stopped MERS. They have stopped this virus, and Taiwan has stopped this virus. Over the weekend, New Zealand just had a presidential election or a prime minister election, and Jacinda Ardern got reelected in a landslide. They have had 25 deaths since January in New Zealand. The entire country, 25 deaths. They've got the virus totally under control there because they've got good leadership. And we don't. And so, yeah.
What would you recommend from the leader to stop what's going on? What would you do if you were the president?
I would tell, you start out by having everybody wear a mask. I mean, that'll handle 70% of the problem, Stephen. Thank you for the call. The Hidden History of Monopoly tells how Robert Bork, that guy from the Reagan era, transformed corporate America and destroyed the American dream. Hey, we have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for folks who support our program. It's about a growing movement, oddly enough, on the hard right, on the far fringe extreme right, that says that because Congress, after the Civil War, had not seated senators and members of the House from the former Confederate states and refused to until they changed their state constitutions to eliminate slavery, because they did not have a say in the writing and the passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments that ended slavery, gave equal protection under the law to everybody, and guaranteed the right to vote to formerly enslaved people, that because the Confederate States were not represented, these are illegitimate amendments. And oddly, one of the people who's at the forefront of this is Amy Coney Barrett. It's all over at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. The mayor of Tucson, Regina Romero, Donald Trump, he's going all over the country wherever he's having problems. And I frankly, I think he's going to be making his problems worse. But he wants to go back to Tucson. Well, he was in Tucson in 2016, rented the convention center, hired a bunch of police to provide security, and then never paid the police and never paid the city for the convention center. Trump never pays police. I think Trump dislikes police. I think he hates cops, basically. He's always, I love the cops and the cops love me because, the authority guys and and guns and stuff. But I really, he refuses to pay them in city after city after city. And now in Tucson, they're saying, pay up. And Trump is going, no, I'm not going to pay you. And by the way, I just increased the size of my my rally. It's absolutely mind-boggling. Dave in Las Vegas. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, Mr. Hartmann. Hey, I had this idea. It might be wacky. I'm going to run it by you. Okay, so they've been delaying getting Trump's business records, right? And they say they're going to fall on Cy Vance's lap, right? The Southern District of New York. So I'm in my head, I'm thinking, so what if there's a good chance, say, God forbid, Trump gets reelected, I hope not, and, whatever. But if, but then there's a good chance we flip the Senate, right? And now we have the power and then the means, and then, the side that somehow it gets that the business records go to Congress. And now we got, that would be just desserts and turnabouts, fair play.
If Trump gets reelected and the Democrats take the Senate, Trump will be impeached again, and he will be removed from office by the Senate. I think that the odds of that are in the high 90%.
Yep. And so everybody, right. Hopefully he won't get reelected, but I think he's, either way.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah, he's toast. And a fine thing it is. Thanks a lot for the call, Dave. John in Minneapolis. Hey, John, what's up?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think the American public, to get back to your original questions that you had for the audience, is so gaslighted, by decade after decade of lies, of distortions, and a lot of money in politics. And, Senator Whitehouse really pointed that out when he, used his time when talking with the Judiciary Commission on Amy Coney Barrett's, nomination. He pointed out all of the dark money that comes from these various organizations. And the latest little dark money trick is to the Barrington Declaration that was bought and paid for by the Koch brothers. And so I'm not surprised that, that is working to try to interfere what's going on in Harvard, at Stanford, at Oxford, all of these large institutions. It's hard for people to really wrap their whole head around following all of this and just either totally become numb, I would say, in a state of despair, or they actually buy into it, or they follow the propaganda. This is how the Soviet Union maintained power despite all of the evidence to the other, to the opposite. They were doing really badly. They couldn't deliver any of the consumer goods. They didn't deliver the promised revolution to the proletariat, but yet they were still able to maintain power, and it's very easy to do. And
John, let me tell you what I think is going on here. I think you might be missing something, and we just have a minute and a half till we're going to hit a break, so let me just lay this out very, very quickly. Charles Koch and his libertarian billionaire buddies have been on a Jeremiad since the 1970s, particularly since the 1980s, saying that government, particularly a regulatory government, the government's power to stop their refineries from poisoning people downwind, is an illegitimate power. The government should not have that kind of power. And they have succeeded in gutting, in many regards, government's power in that regard. They're nowhere close to their goal in 1980, they called for completely eliminating the Environmental Protection Agency. So now we've got a national public health crisis. And on one side, you've got, Democrats, some Republicans, good government people, and just rational scientists saying now is when the government has a responsibility to step in and regulate our activities to save lives. And these libertarians are like, oh my God, this is going to bring back big government. This is going to give, if the big government stops this virus, it's going to give credibility to the idea of big government intervention, and they're scared to death of that. Back to you, Jim.
That's correct. And, this dysfunction is just destroying the very fabric of this society. And it's not, happening in other social democracies like just north of us, right. Sweden, Denmark, Germany. They all have
Canada.
Some of these same issues, but not to the extent that we do. And this is because we believe in neoliberalism as a religion. And the Koch brothers are its biggest supporters, yes.
Yeah, neoliberalism being, deregulation and destruction. Well, as Steve Bannon said, our job, the Trump administration's job, is to deconstruct the administrative state. In other words, destroy the American government from within. Steve Bannon just came right out and said it. John, thank you. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabby.com. Gabby takes the pain out of insurance shopping. More info at Gabby.com/Tom. Bowl and Branch Sheets, crafted for the common good. More info at bowlandbranch.com, code Tom. CB Distillery for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Tom. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. And Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more information, teethhealth.com, code Tom.
We say fight back!
We're reading today from a book by David Sanger, the Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times national security reporter. The title of the book is The Perfect Weapon, War, Sabotage, and Fear in the Cyber Age. We're reading from the preface. A year into Donald J. Trump's presidency, his defense secretary, Jim Mattis, sent the new commander-in-chief a startling recommendation. With nations around the world threatening to use cyber weapons to bring down America's power grids, cell phone networks, and water supplies, Trump should declare that he's ready to take extraordinary steps to protect the country. If any nation hit America's critical infrastructure with a devastating strike, even a non-nuclear one, it should be forewarned that the United States might reach for a nuclear weapon in response. Like most things in Washington, the recommendation leaked immediately. Excuse me. Many declared it a crazy idea and wild overkill. While nations had turned their cyber weapons against each other dozens of times in recent years, no attack had yet proven to cost a human life, at least directly. Not the American attacks on Iran's and North Korea's weapon programs, not the North Korean attacks on American banks, a famed Hollywood studio, and the British healthcare system, not the Russian attacks in Ukraine, Europe, and then at the core of American democracy. That streak of luck was certain to end soon, but why should Donald Trump or any of his successors take the huge risk of escalating a cyber war by going nuclear? The Pentagon's recommendation, it turned out, was the prelude to other proposals delivered to a president who values toughness and America first to use the nation's powerful cyber weapons far more aggressively. But it was also a reminder of how quickly the fear of devastating cyber attacks has moved from the stuff of science fiction and die-hard movies to the center of American defense strategy. Just over a decade before, in 2007, cyber attacks are missing entirely from the global threat assessment that intelligence agencies prepare each year for Congress. Terrorism topped that list, along with other post-9/11 concerns. Now that hierarchy has been reversed. For several years, a variety of cyber threats, ranging from a paralyzing strike on the nation's cities to a sophisticated effort to undercut public confidence in its institutions, has appeared as the nation's #1 threat on the list. Not since the Soviets tested the bomb in 1949 had the perception of threats facing the nation been revised so quickly. Yet Mattis, who had risen to 4-star status in a career focused in the Middle East, feared that the 2 decades spent chasing al-Qaeda and ISIS around the globe had distracted America from its most potent challenges. Great power competition, not terrorism, is now the primary focus of U.S. national security, he said in early 2018. America's, quote, competitive edge has eroded in every domain of warfare, including the newest one, cyberspace. The nuclear strategy he handed Trump gave voice to an inchoate fear
among many in the Pentagon that cyber attacks posed a threat unlike any other, one that we had completely failed to deter. The irony is that the United States remains the world's stealthiest, most skillful cyber power, as the Iranians discovered when their centrifuges spun out of control, and the North Koreans suspected as their missiles fell out of the sky. But the gap is closing. Cyber weapons are so cheap to develop and so easy to hide that they've proven irresistible. And American officials are discovering that in a world in which almost everything is connected, phones, cars, electrical grids, and satellites, everything can be disrupted, if not destroyed. For several years, the thinking inside the Pentagon was that only nations with nuclear weapons could threaten America's existence. Now that assumption is in doubt. In almost every classified Pentagon scenario for how a future confrontation with Russia and China, or even Iran and North Korea might play out, the adversary's first strike against the United States would include a cyber barrage aimed at civilians. It would fry power grids, stop trains, silence cell phones, and overwhelm the internet. In the worst-case scenarios, food and water would begin to run out. Hospitals would turn people away. Separated from their electronics and thus their connections, Americans would panic and turn against one another. The Pentagon is now planning for this scenario because it knows many of its own war plans open with similarly paralyzing cyber attacks against our adversaries, reflecting new strategies to try to win wars before a shot is fired. Glimpses of what this would look like have leaked out in recent years, thanks partly to Edward J. Snowden, partly because of a mysterious group called the Shadow Brokers, suspected of close links to Russian intelligence, obtained terabytes of data containing many of the tools that the National Security Agency used to breach foreign computer networks. It didn't take long for some of those stolen cyber weapons to be shot back at America and its allies in attacks whose bizarre-sounding names, like WannaCry, suddenly appeared in the headlines every week. Yet the secrecy surrounding these programs obscures most public debate about the wisdom of using them or the risks inherent in losing control of them. The government's silence about America's new arsenal and its implications poses a sharp contrast to the first decades of the nuclear era. The horrific scenes of destruction at Hiroshima and Nagasaki not only seared the national psyche, but made America's destructive capabilities, and soon Russia's and China's, obvious and undeniable. Yet even while the government kept the details classified, how to build atomic weapons, where they are stored, and who has the authority to order their launch, America engaged in a decades-long political debate about when to threaten to use the bomb and whether to ban it. The book, The Perfect Weapon by David E. Sanger, use of the pronoun he, shines his good news on every human being alike. The book is Separated by the Border by Gina Thomas.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us is Kevin Kamps, the nuclear waste specialist at beyondnuclear.org. Twitter handle also Beyond Nuclear. Kevin, welcome back. I understand that more Fukushima water that the Japanese are preparing to pour just a blank load of radiation into the ocean. What's going on with this?
Yeah, this issue has been going on since 2011. So they use this cooling water to try to keep the melted cores cool. And once they get it out of the cores, they put it in these storage tanks. And so what they've got at this point is over 300 million gallons of highly radioactively contaminated wastewater. And one of the main contaminants is tritium, which is radioactive hydrogen, which cannot be filtered at an industrial scale. And the Japanese government and Tokyo Electric are proposing to simply dump it in the ocean. And the only thing stopping them is the fishing cooperatives of Japan, who are like the little Dutch boy with their finger in the dike.
Wow. What's the half-life of tritium?
It's 12.3 years. So that's 123 years of hazard. And the fishing cooperatives, and I should say that, allies across the world have joined them, hundreds or thousands of environmental groups, for example. If the wastewater were to be stored for 125 years, the tritium would dissipate, which is very good news. It's what the fishing cooperatives are calling for. Don't pollute the ocean. Because what would happen as giants in this field like Rosalie Bertell have long warned, it doesn't dissipate in the ocean. It reconcentrates in the seafood supply, and humans are at the top of that bioaccumulation hazard. So that's what the fishing cooperatives and their allies internationally are trying to stop.
Right, so these radioactive elements, they get consumed by the algae and the small plants, and then the small fish eat the small plants, and then the medium-sized fish eat the small fish, and then the bigger fish eat the medium-sized fish, and then the giant fishes like the tuna eat the big fish, and then we eat the tuna, and guess what? Now we've got an amount of radiation that probably started out being spread over miles of ocean on a little 1 ounce square of meat on our plate in front of us. Am I accurately characterizing that, Kevin?
Yes, and the government and Tokyo Electric are trying to downplay the hazards of tritium, which is a real mistake. Tritium packs a real punch at the microbiological level, so it can destroy DNA molecules. It's a beta emitter, and it packs a real punch at that intimate level. It can cause cancer, it can cause birth defects, it can cause genetic damage, and they're simply treating it as if it's harmless, and it's not.
That's breathtaking. Meanwhile, tell me about the Cook reactors. These are near Chicago, do I have that right?
Directly across Lake Michigan from Chicago. It's in southwest Michigan, Bridgman, in Berrien County, Michigan.
Okay.
Directly
what's going on with these things?
Well, for a long time, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has been in regulatory retreat, and it's just grown worse under the pandemic. Now they use the pandemic as an excuse to skip repairs, to skip inspections. And what's happening at Cook right now, similar to what happened at Davis-Besse, Ohio, back in 2002, is they're finding boric acid crystals on the top of the reactor lid. It means they have a leak, and they don't know where the leak is coming from. And what happened in Ohio 18 years ago was a giant crater got corroded into the lid of the reactor vessel and nearly burst. It would have been a meltdown. It was the nearest miss since 3 Mile Island. Now they're playing games with the same kind of situation at Cook, taking very optimistic assumptions that the leakage is from certain places and not others, risking another corrosion hole in the reactor lid at Cook as we speak. Simply not doing inspections because there's insulation in the way, there are visual impediments to doing the inspections, and for convenience sake, they're just skipping the inspections. And what happened at Ohio 18 years ago was a near catastrophe because of such a regulatory retreat.
How many people are in the blast zone is not the right phrase, but if this thing melts down just like 3 Mile Island did, not an explosion or a minor explosion inside the reactor, but basically a release of radiation. I'm assuming that that's kind of a best case scenario if anything bad happens. How many people might be vulnerable to that, and did I get anything wrong in what I just said?
Well, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission commissioned a study on this back in 1982. The figures were so shocking that they tried to conceal the results, but Ed Markey, who's running for re-election in the Senate right now, got it outed in congressional hearings, and the figures were very shocking. If Cook Unit 1 were to have a meltdown, 1,900 people could die from radiation poisoning, acute radiation poisoning. Another 80,000 people would be injured, radiation injuries, and then another 13,000 latent cancer fatalities. And then the property damage was something like $90 billion downwind and downstream, and this is on the lakeshore of Lake Michigan. Chicago's right across the lake. So the population has grown dramatically since 1982. More people would be harmed, and the property damage is just adjusting for inflation, not even counting economic development since 1982, would now be closer to $250 billion.
And let's see, I'm guessing that these nuclear power plants don't have an insurance company that's on the hook for that?
Well, they have the U.S. federal government behind them, which means taxpayers. So the industry...
Oh, you and I are the insurance policy.
Yeah, the first $12.5 billion of that $250 billion would be the nuclear power industry and its insurance companies paying that. Above that $12.5 billion, it would be taxpayers, but it would require the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission to declare an extraordinary nuclear occurrence, which they did not do at 3 Mile Island, a 50% meltdown. They didn't even do it. They didn't invoke the Price-Anderson Act. And even when NRC acts, Congress has to act. They have to appropriate the money. That's a lot of ifs. And probably they just let people be on their own to deal with their own losses. That's the most likely.
So are these corroding, leaking reactors using Lake Michigan for cooling water? If so, is that cooling water running through that reactor right now? And if so, if the leak, instead of happening into the air, happens into Lake Michigan, what does that mean? We have about
Cook does not have cooling towers. Cook simply discharges all of its waste heat into Lake Michigan. And what this has meant, like in the wintertime, when the lake is naturally cold, they're dumping tremendous amounts of hot water, unimaginable, millions of gallons of hot water into the lake. And the fish are in this warm, artificially warm water. If Cook has an unplanned shutdown in the wintertime, what has happened in the past is the fish cannot adjust to that thermal shock of the cold coming back in. You can have fish kills of 500,000 fish at Cook. It's happened in the past, and those are the kind of risks they're taking. They saved money on not building cooling towers, though.
Wow. So instead of steam going into the air like we see with a normal nuclear power plant, they're simply pulling it in out of Lake Michigan, running it past the reactor core, and then pushing it back out into the lake. You were talking about, how a shutdown might kill off the fish in the 45 seconds we have left. What happens if there's a leak in that reactor vessel and that radioactive material gets into this discharge water that's going into Lake Michigan? Is it safely diluted?
There are leaks, but there are also intentional releases. The wastewater release pathway at Cook and other American reactors is into the surface water that they get their cooling water from. So they have regular, intentional releases of radioactivity. And again, it's not dilution as the solution. It's reconcentration. It's bioaccumulation in the fish of Lake Michigan. And people eat those fish. And that's how the harm is delivered. And there are no epidemiological studies to follow these harms. So they simply go undocumented. But they do occur.
Astonishing. You can read all about it over at beyondnuclear.org. Kevin Kamps, the nuclear waste specialist at Beyond Nuclear. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks for dropping by today.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
Always great talking with you. We will be right back. We've got more of the news of the day. Be picking up your calls, all that kind of stuff. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, 15 minutes past the hour. Viagra for your brain that does not lead to stiff thinking.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's the true people's media. And we'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls. And welcome back, Jane in Teaneck, New Jersey. Hey, Jane, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
Hello, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. This is a first-time caller. I just have a very brief message for all my fellow Americans. This election is very, very critical, as everybody knows. So you have a choice. You have a choice between voting for somebody who has killed over 210,000 fellow Americans, or you vote for his opponent. So it's very simple. It's not rocket science. There are a lot of issues, and it can make your brain spin, and you can get overwhelmed with all these other issues. But this is the overarching issue before us today in 2020. You have to vote against this homicidal maniac. Get him out. And then let's discuss on November 4th what we can do about all our millions of problems that you, Tom, discuss every day on the air. But with this mad person at the helm, there is going to be no movement. There's just going to be more people dead from this virus. And that's my sole message. Don't make it complicated. That's all it is
I'm with you,
right
Jane.
now.
Yep. Step one, throw the bums out. Yeah, I'm totally with you. Jane, thank you. Very, very, very well said. Nice, tight, articulate message. Al in Middletown, Pennsylvania. Hey, Al, what's on your mind?
Hello. I turned 50 years old, and as a black man, I see the country going backwards, especially in civil rights. I'm fear of the police practices and the president's rhetoric. After being detained in Middletown this morning on my walk by police who were looking for a black man and no description. I was wearing bright silver reflective shorts, reflective shoes, a white T-shirt, a reflective vest, glowing in the dark barbells. And when I asked if they were going to detain every black man they run into, the officer stated I was the only black person that they had saw. They took my freedom this morning without verifying any type of crime outside of the 911 call or interviewing the caller to get a full description of who they were looking for. This is not the America I want to see. The very thought.
Al, were you out jogging?
Yeah, I was walking to the post office. The very thought the police union says to support this is terrible. The complaint process is ridiculous. As a matter of fact, this morning an officer tried to intimidate me while trying to file a complaint, making me feel like I had no business entering the police station. There is nothing in the process that is transparent with time, expectations, confirmation of documentation being submitted, or who would contact you. The complaint, you don't know if the complaint is going to sit on someone's desk or wait until they decide to look at it. Now, we need change, and I do not have the faith that in this country right now that we will get them.
Yeah, I get it, Al. I get it. And it must be very, very discouraging on the one hand. On the other hand, there's a lot of people with you right now. And, I mean, there's a lot of people of all races, who are absolutely with you, Al. And we will get through this. I realize it's a very difficult time. It's been a difficult time for 400 years for African Americans. We've got to clean this up. Al, thank you for sharing your story with us. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 20 minutes past 3. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So we need to be thinking right now about how to Trump-proof the presidency in the future. I mean, Donald Trump is causing all kinds of chaos and disasters, and things are, frankly, I think, going to get much worse before they get better. And I don't think they're going to get better until after January 21st or January, noon on January 20th. And that's assuming that, absolute craziness doesn't happen. But, there's a bunch of steps that we need to take, from recalibrating or fixing how we do our elections, to fixing how we handle money in politics, to fixing the pardon power of the presidency, to specifically saying that if a president is found to be a criminal, he or she can still be held to account. I mean, just straightforward stuff. And we need to be getting ready to do this. I lay it all out in a new video for people who support our program that you can find over at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. A few other things here in the news that I wanted to share with you. The Trump administration, I believe it's Sonny Perdue, is the agriculture secretary. I can't keep all the Perdue's straight. Maybe not. Maybe it's maybe I've got his name wrong, or I'm mixing him up with the senator from Georgia. But in any case, Sonny Perdue, U.S. Agriculture Secretary Sonny Perdue. Okay, I got it right. A federal judge. This is from the Washington Post today. A federal judge on yesterday, formally struck down the Trump administration attempt to end food stamp benefits for nearly 700,000 unemployed people. Let that sink in. Sonny Perdue, the Agriculture Department, and Donald Trump, the Trump administration, notified whoever they notify that they were going to end food stamp benefits at the end of this year for 700,000 people. Almost 1 million people. All of them getting those benefits because they are unemployed. And the Chief U.S. District Judge Beryl Howell, She is an appointee of the Obama administration. She's an Obama appointee. She said no. In fact, she condemned the Agriculture Department. She said, at issue in this litigation, the rule radically and abruptly alters decades of regulatory practice, leaving states scrambling and exponentially increasing food insecurity for tens of thousands of Americans. The Agriculture Department, this is what the judge wrote. The Agriculture Department, quote, has been icily silent about how many adults have been denied SNAP benefits had the changes sought been in effect when the pandemic rapidly spread across the country. She said that this, speaking of Sonny Perdue and the Department of Agriculture, which administers the food stamp program, their utter failure to address the issue renders the agency action arbitrary and capricious. So what did the Agriculture Department do? They said, well, this is a district court, right? And this is an Obama appointee. Let's take it to an appeals court where there's lots and lots of Trump appointees. So 700,000 people are getting food stamps right now because they're on unemployment. By the way, and Trump is literally going to court to try to cut them off, which is mind-boggling. At the same time, these guys they're trying to cut off long-term unemployment. You'll recall, we used to have long-term unemployment that was more or less unlimited. And then some of the reforms, I think, during the Clinton administration cut it down to a couple of years. Then it got cut down to 2 years. And then it got cut down to 1 year, as I recall, during the Bush administration. And so for a lot of Americans who lost their jobs in February, March, April, and by the way, some states don't even have 1 year. Some states choose to take federal money to support unemployment for a much shorter period of time. In some states, it's 6 months or 9 months. So what's starting to happen right now, and is going to happen in a much bigger way in January, February, and March of next year, which, keep in mind, is just 4, 5, 6 months down the road, is that millions and millions of Americans, we got 30 million Americans on unemployment right now. As many as half of them could simply lose all their benefits. And if you no longer qualify for unemployment benefits, in many states, you no longer qualify for food stamps. I mean, we are 20%, 1 in 5 black children in America, or 1 in 5 black African-American families in America have children in their family who do not have access to enough food. Now, this is also true in poor white communities in Appalachia, places like that. The numbers are not quite as severe as a percentage of the population, but the raw numbers are probably very similar. And it's a massive problem in Hispanic communities, particularly Hispanic communities that may have intermingling in their communities, people who are here with not as legal residents or as citizens of the United States, who may be even more reluctant to apply for any kind of federal assistance. But from the Republican point of view, to hell with them. Screw them all. Meanwhile, in the next year, this is the headline over at Forbes, the business magazine. The headline, Trump will have $900 million of loans coming due in his second term if he's reelected. $900 million. Trump's interests in 555 California Street and 1290 Avenue of the Americas are the two most valuable holdings in his entire portfolio. Right now, the California skyscraper is encumbered with a loan of an estimated $541 million, expiring in September of 2021, September of next year. These properties have a combined $1.5 billion in debt against them. Trump's share of that is that $447 million as a limited partner. And that doesn't at all get into his other loans on his other properties. I mean, that's just one of many. They go through this Forbes article, goes through at great length. Trump is $1 billion in debt. And as far as anybody can tell, he has no way of paying it back. What he's been doing for the last decade is he's been borrowing to pay off previous debts. He can't do that anymore.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
unless he does what he threatened to do on Friday or Saturday rally, which is leave the country. If he does, where do you think he's going to go?
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur. This is a book that was written back in the late 90s, but it's still very, very timely. This is from the second chapter titled Class Antagonisms Inside the Fundamental Contradiction of National Oppression. Having just passed the 19th and quickly approaching the 20th anniversary of the LA Rebellion, we should be reminded here of what Rodney King whimpered as he stood in front of a bank of microphones surrounded by class enemies and neo-colonial politicians. We should remember how he'd been dressed in that non-threatening cardigan sweater, white shirt, and black tie, how his hair had been tortured into submission by a jerry curl. We should reflect as well upon how timid and spooked he looked, and on how concerned and stern those who flanked him were as well. That was a Kodak moment. It was staged to foster an image of contrition and resignation, submission, a victim. Rodney King had been led to believe, through a bourgeois sense of reasoning, that the rebellion was really about him, that the reason new Africans and Mexicanos took to the streets of South Central was the result of his filmed beating. That, of course, is typical of mechanical bourgeois thinking. What it's not typical of, however, is someone from the hood. And this cuts both ways. No one in the hoods and barrios ever thought it was about Rodney King. We'd all seen the film over and over like everyone else, but that was par for the course. We'd always seen that, long before anybody caught it on tape. Actually, we'd experienced much more than that. Why, it's safe to say that the hoods had gone to war with each other in vicious waves of internal, intra-class combat for much less than that, though because of a general colonial mentality which prevents the challenging of bottom-up oppression, the same hood forces will not, in any systemic way, wage war on the pigs, or for freedom, land, and socialism. Rodney King alone, and of his own accord, would not have thought to hold a press conference to ask the asinine question in the form of a whimpering request, can't we just all get along? The fact of the matter is, we are getting along. New Africans and Mexicanos are getting along just fine. What we couldn't understand was why he was admonishing us for getting at the exploiters of our communities. The impression he gave, with his handler's hands up his back like a ventriloquist troll, was that a race riot was going on, as if we had all begun to kill each other or burn and rob each other's homes. His handlers compelled him to send up a false flag, a diversion. But you see, this was the very thing that exposed the class interests and reactionary politics of the Uncle Toms that had been designated to handle him, and by extension, us. Let's go back for a minute. Let's talk social development, aka history. There exists a fundamental contradiction in our lives that, like an elephant in the room, no one wants to acknowledge. As a consequence of the war waged upon various African nations by European powers, those of us captured and kidnapped were taken out of our own self-determining social developments and violently forced into Euro-American history. This is not simply a clever play on words. This is a reality. We lost the ability to control our own destiny. Read that again. From that time until now, the fundamental basic contradiction between the U.S. oppressor nation and our own oppressed and colonized nation has been the governing imperialist relationship, which is to say, us not being in control of the qualitative factors that determine our lives as a people, as a nation. Our tradition of struggle against this fundamental contradiction has taken many forms, some hidden or obscured, some open and hostile. But all of these have been open to resolve the fundamental contradiction and to regain our independence. While there have been some bona fide struggles to resolve the contradiction, there have also been reactionary neocolonial struggles waged by internal enemies loyal to the oppressor nation and culture that have tried time and time again to subvert and control our destiny for the benefit of the capitalists. They've come among us, always imposed from above, stirring up emotions and giving lip service to progress, equality, justice, and prosperity. These always within the colonial confines of the oppressor's arrangements, and none collectively ever materialize, because without a resolution of the fundamental contradiction, that is the freeing of our productive forces from U.S. imperialism and the governing of our own affairs, we'll remain a minority within the American system as opposed to a majority in our own. and subjected to the established bourgeois social contract, i.e. colonialism, neo and post. We can parade all through the empire with black congressmen, black mayors, black governors, black police chiefs, black Supreme Court justices, hell, even a black president. And absolutely nothing will alter the genocidal relationship that governs our national oppression here, because the blacks are part of the colonial apparatus. They have made a strategic alliance with the capitalist imperialists to act as go-betweens in our oppression and exploitation. This is a conscious class stand. The black petty bourgeois is not innocently confused, like, say, Mrs. Jackson across the street is, about our national oppression, about the existence and subjugation of New Africa. They are well-read, have traveled in our experience. They've just chosen sides against us and in favor of our historical enemies. And the sooner we recognize and internalize this, the better off we'll be. Black ain't nothing but a color. As a designation of our national identity, it has played out. It is a superficial understanding at best and a foolish and dangerous analysis at worst. We have no collective control over the qualitative factors which determine our lives. We do not, in other words, control our destiny, not as a people or a state. The book is Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur.
The Hartmann Report is a free daily podcast 7 days a week, and you can find our entire 3-hour podcast over at thomhartmann.com.
So we have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who are signed up, for supporters of our program. And it's about how Donald Trump, 16 days after Mr. Khashoggi was murdered by the Saudis in Turkey and his body dismembered and vanished, 16 days after that happened, without notifying Congress and with virtually no mention to anybody, Donald Trump authorized the transfer of top secret nuclear technology to the Saudis. This should be a serious issue. Tim Kaine, the senator from Virginia, is raising hell about it because Khashoggi lived in Virginia. But I think everybody in Congress should be raising hell about this. And when you back this up with this new report out from ProPublica that the Saudis were involved in 9/11, it gets real interesting. So you can check that out over at thomhartmann.com. You know, look for our basically members-only video. Oh, welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And, oh, man. Oh, interesting. Just one quick piece here that I wanted to share with you, and then I'll pick up your phone calls. Judd Legum's newsletter today, popular.info. That's the website, by the way, and it's also the name of his newsletter, or the newsletter's Popular Information. Senator David Perdue, by the way, Purdue Chicken tweeted this weekend, "We have no affiliation with Senator David Perdue." It's like this guy has become so toxic. After he made fun of Kamala Harris's name, there was this whole thing on Saturday where people were tweeting, "My name is," as a hashtag. And I saw Ro Khanna do it, and so I kind of copied his. And, I said, "My name is Thomas," and, it means twin or leader in Greek and Aramaic, and I will be voting for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And, it's basically a way of pushing back on David Perdue with his, his racist, making fun of her, non-white Anglo-Saxon name, basically. In fact, this is from Eliza at Purdue Chicken. At Purdue Chicken is the Twitter handle. "Hi there, I can assure you that David Perdue has no affiliation with our Purdue brand." But anyhow, in the newsletter, in the Popular Information newsletter, Judd Legum's newsletter, he points out that Google has given tens of thousands of dollars to Republican Perdue, not a penny to Democrat Jon Ossoff, who's running against him. Coca-Cola has given tens of thousands of dollars to Perdue, not a penny to Ossoff. Walmart, tens of thousands of dollars to Perdue, not a penny to Ossoff. Deloitte, the big accounting firm, tens of thousands, almost $20,000 to Perdue, not one penny to Jon Ossoff, the Democrat. Target, thousands to Perdue, nothing to Ossoff. Facebook, thousands to Perdue, nothing to Ossoff. Amazon, thousands to Perdue, nothing to Ossoff. Funny how big American corporations seem to support Republicans, isn't it? Just the strangest thing. Whoever would have thought? I mean, who could have imagined?
Michael in Las Vegas. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Good morning. How are you? I wanted to talk to you a bit more about the idea of the Trump Crimes Commission. There's a op-ed, a perspective by Jill Lepore in the Washington Post this morning, and she is actually coming out against it, which I can't believe because, in my opinion, come noon, January 20th, as soon as we can convene a grand jury, I think whoever the next AG is going to be needs to start presenting evidence, because I believe it's overwhelming at this point that this whole administration and the Trump crime family are absolutely corrupt and criminal. Everybody from the top down, Trump, Pence, Pompeo, Sessions, remember Ryan Zinke and Alex Acosta, the whole Epstein thing.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think we even have touched just the superficial, shallow depths of the criminality. And may I read just a portion of this op-ed to you to get your reaction?
If it's not more than a sentence or two, yeah.
Yeah, surely post-Trump, when that day comes, there will be investigations. A bipartisan 9/11 style commission to study the federal government's response to the pandemic seems not only likely but essential. But she says it's wrongdoing, a litany that includes corruption, fomenting insurrection, separating parents and children at the border, and violently suppressing political dissent should be investigated by journalists, chronicled by historians, and in some instances tried in ordinary court. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think what she's missing is that 22 members of the Nixon administration went to prison for the crimes that they committed in support of Richard Nixon's criminality, including the Attorney General of the United States and the White House Chief of Staff. They went to prison. John Haldeman and John Mitchell. I called him George Mitchell earlier. I had it wrong. John Mitchell. And, they went to prison. So, I get this whole thing about, we don't want to become one of these banana republics. I mean, we saw this in Brazil after Lula got replaced by a right-winger. The right-winger, started prosecuting the former left-wing president and all that kind of stuff. And now it's becoming, a regular thing, and it's happening in third world countries around the world and has been forever. And we don't want to go down that road. I get that. But crimes need to be punished, actual clear crimes. So,
absolutely.
Rather than, arguably, go ahead, finish.
Well, no, I just wanted to say I completely agree with you. The administration, I'm telling you, Radcliffe, I don't know if you're aware, but he came out this morning and told Maria Bartiromo that this Hunter Biden laptop is not part of some Russian disinformation campaign. How stupid do these people think we are? They're clearly...
They think we're quite stupid.
Apparently. Luckily, those of us who listen to Free Speech TV and shows like yours, get our news from reputable sources. And how do these people not think that they don't look completely compromised? And I go back to the hacking of the RNC. And do you recall how back in 2016, the Russian hackers only disseminated the DNC emails, John Podesta's and whatnot, to denigrate Hillary and the Democrats?
Even though they had the Republican emails.
Correct. And we never saw those Republican National Committee, the RNC emails. And to this day, we still haven't seen them. I'm telling you, they have got to be blackmailed. I believe they're compromised. I don't know what is in those emails. I hope one day we all get to see them. But I'm telling you, what else explains the just kowtowing to Donald Trump and Russia and these authoritarian countries and those GOP senators spending a July 4th over in Russia, and now all this ridiculous, baseless partisanship denigrating Biden at any cost, trying to keep Trump in the White House and for the GOP to maintain power.
Yeah.
I mean,
no, I totally get it, Michael. And either they are being blackmailed, either they're very afraid of something, or they're being paid off. You know, they see this as a way to maintain political power. And Michael, thank you very much for the call. And the point that I was trying to make earlier is that while we don't want to become a banana republic by having the federal government prosecute previous presidents, the way to avoid that is to have, number one, an independent commission. I mean, literally completely politically independent, that looks into these crimes and refers them out to grand juries. Ideally state grand juries, but it could be a federal grand jury. And secondly, you've got numerous state and city prosecutions going forward against Donald Trump personally. But I'm talking about, his attorney general, his chief of staff, his person who was running the whole program to tear nursing babies away from their mothers and put them in cages for years. For years now, these children have been in cages. This is just like, these are crimes against humanity. Richard in Ypsilanti, Michigan. Hey, Richard, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I just wanted to say that if you of course remember the Watergate era. With the words that Gerald Ford said after he pardoned Nixon for Watergate, I think would be even more apropos now if Trump gets defeated, where he said that our long national nightmare is finally over.
Right. Yeah. Although that was an 8-year nightmare, this is just a 4-year nightmare. But I am with you, Richard, and I am very, very hopeful that nightmare will be over soon. Thank you for the call. Don in Durant, Oklahoma. Hey, Don, what's up?
Yes, Tom, I was wanting to respond yes, can you hear me? Hello.
Oh, I'm sorry. We've developed a little bit of latency, so there's about a second delay between us. So just keep going, Don.
Yes, I was wanting to respond to a 60-minute story I heard on TV last night, and it was when this pandemic started, the French put like 300 Americans on a French plane, and they knew that 3 people had COVID that they put on that plane. Well, it flew across to, I think, Atlantic, one of the largest airports in the United States. And instead of quarantining the people, they took the 3 that was infected, then they let the rest fly all over the United States. And
yeah, we saw this, particularly when Trump, he very, very abruptly shut down travel from Europe. And the result of that was people having to stand in line for hours, in some cases a half a day, to go through customs, which turned the entire U.S. international airport system into a giant super spreader event just in time for it to hit New York and New Jersey. You're right, Don. Thank you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
45 minutes past the hour. Back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where smart people get their news. And welcome back. Paula in Seattle. Hey, Paula, what's on your mind today?
Oh, yes, Tom, I was wondering, we've been talking about all these rallies in areas where the COVID virus is hot and heavy. Couldn't the mayor or the public health official in those cities charge him with reckless endangerment or charge his campaign with reckless endangerment? And how do they get permits in areas where large groups are not approved?
I doubt they could. And the reason I doubt they could is that is this whole idea of supremacy, that the federal government has supremacy over state and local governments. And when you combine that, jurisdictional supremacy, you combine that with the concept of sovereign immunity. And I don't think you get more sovereign than the President of the United States, that people in elective office cannot be held to account for crimes that they commit, essentially. Individually, they might be able to be held to account, but that has to be by the government itself. But the government can't be held to account by the American people. So I think that, I just don't think it would work. I mean, the mayor of Tucson, It's just trying to say, pay your damn bills, right? You owe us a couple $100,000 from when you were here in 2016. Yeah. Trump owes cities all over America tens of millions of dollars in fees for the police that he has stiffed and in rental fees for public, venues. And he's just, he's not paying his bills, which is nothing new for Donald Trump. It's been how he has been doing business his whole entire life.
Don't they have to have permits for group meetings at large? And how do they get those?
They have been ignoring the process. Yeah, they've been ignoring the process and basically saying, sue me or try to prosecute me. And no mayor wants to do that. No mayor wants the death threats. I mean, Gretchen Whitmer just said wear a mask and happened to be a woman. And Donald Trump has sent his goons after her with guns. I mean, this is what it has come to. So, yeah. Well, Paula, thank you for the call. It's a big issue. Jonathan in Portland. Hey, Jonathan, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I wanted to pick up with the idea you were talking about corporations giving money to Republicans and not Democrats. That's half the equation. The other half of the equation, of course, is what do they get for it? And what they get is a lot more money than what they're giving. And a great example of that is the infamous vulture capitalist Paul Singer. And if you want to understand what's going on in the country, you just look at what's going on with Paul Singer. He is pouring money into Republican governors, and they're using the money illegally to promote Republican candidates. And in turn, they are siphoning off hundreds of millions of dollars in pension funds and public pension funds into his Elliott management, which has been losing money for decades and underperforming. And there are certain states that have caught on and they pulled their funds from him. But this is the same Paul Singer, by the way, that sent out a memo to all his employees February 1st telling them to lock down the place we're in for quarantine, right? Long before good old Bob Woodward was reporting on Trump giving talks to donors, rich donors, at the end of February. And
yeah, I thought some of those were at the end of January, actually, but it may well be. But and also, just to put a punctuation mark on your point, Jonathan, Shelley Adelson just decided to give $75 million to Republican senators. So, all the news is about, Lindsey Graham was outraised by $12 million in South Carolina, by Jamie Harrison. Well, not when it comes to the dark money. The hidden history of the war on voting tells how the GOP has been stealing elections for decades and will again this year unless we stop them. So in our latest video for supporters of our program over at ThomHartmann.com, you'll find a riff about a fellow named Errol Graham. He's a 57-year-old African English individual who starved to death recently in the United Kingdom. The neoliberal Thatcher policies are apparently echoing through the British system now in a rather substantial way, the same way that Reaganomics is echoing through the American system. And we've got tens of thousands of Americans who die every year because they lack health care or they can't afford copays and things. And we have literally millions of children in America who are malnourished or even go to bed hungry every night. It's pretty breathtaking stuff. And I think you'll find the rant particularly interesting or useful, and hope you can share it with your friends when you pick it up. It's over at ThomHartmann.com. Thanks again for supporting our program. And welcome back. 51 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, and Larry in Asheville, North Carolina. Hey, Larry, what's on your mind today?
Guten Tom. I'm calling from a battleground purple state. And the issue being having you urge your listeners, because you have a powerful podium, to vote in person, even when you have alternatives. Like many areas out here, a lot of your Democratic folks at the lower levels that do a lot of the hard work are retired, elderly retired, and err on the side of caution. And the Democrats picked up the notion early on with the COVID emergence to use mail-in or absentee here in North Carolina. But I'm hoping now that they shift gears, there's not much time left. But for those who have requested an absentee ballot, I did the research here at least. You can ignore it, rip it up, and go vote in person. I voted Saturday. It was very safe. Our Minister of Health here in North Carolina, and we have an excellent governor, Roy Cooper, also, said it's no more dangerous than grocery shopping. So get out there because the Trump team is going to use no matter what state, every mail-in ballot that's Democratic, especially, as an excuse for fraud.
I'm with you, Larry. And one of the things that we all know now, the numbers are pretty solidly in, is that Democrats are using mail-in voting about 2-1 over Republicans. And that's why Republicans are so gung-ho to try to, mung that all up. So, yeah, spot on.
Exactly.
Larry, thank you for the call. Stephan in Mentor, Ohio. Hey, Stephan, what's up?
Hey, hi, Tom. Just a quick idea for Joe Biden, and that is that when he gets on the stage, he needs to put together a couple of sentences, maybe a short paragraph, describing in detail how they managed the Ebola crisis in Africa and who got involved, when they discovered it first, who got involved, and how they managed that and were able to localize it and eradicate it, basically. That's the way.
Well, let's not forget, Stephan, we had in the United States, we had a physician who had been working in Africa who came back to the United States and then became symptomatic. He had Ebola. My recollection is he ended up in Texas and they put him in a hospital and everything was good. And then there was a nurse who had been working there and she was in New Jersey and Chris Christie ordered her locked up. Remember that? And the whole Republican Party had gone full hysterical. Oh my God, there's 2 people with Ebola in the United States. We've got to do something. We need some public health emergency. You've got to lock these people up. We got to do. And because you had a Democrat in the White House, this was during the Obama presidency, that the Republican Party went nuts. But now, not so much, right? Not so much.
Exactly. And I think that clearly describing the steps that the Obama administration took and the CDC took in order to capture this virus at the source and deal with it right there, and that's how you deal with pandemics. And
to some extent. I think SARS might be a better example because SARS was the same kind of virus and apparently equally contagious. Whereas Ebola requires physical contact with contaminated fluids. It's much harder to get. But yeah, your point is well taken, Stephan, and I totally agree with it. Thank you. Raleigh in Hinsdale, Illinois. Hey, Raleigh, what's on your mind today? Raleigh is apparently on the phone. Pedro in Houston, Texas. Hey, Pedro, what's on your mind today?
Hi. I've been dying to ask you and, anybody in the media to examine what I think is the most damning evidence of current systemic racism in the United States and the personal racism of its chief executive, Donald J. Trump. Now, that evidence is look at his hiring record of the White House staff, the administration, his appointees. It's 99.9% white.
Most of them.
And nobody looks at that. Nobody addresses that. Now, Kamala Harris in the debate did note that all his appointees for judges to the federal bench, that not one black was there, is in there. His only black woman senior advisor, Omarasa Manigault, he fired and called her a dog. She's written, he's a rapist. He uses the N-word. Okay, that's his staff hiring practices. And the evidence of systemic racism, man, Trump's running a affirmative action program for whites for 4 years now. Look at all of them, his appointees, his spokespeople. And I want to ask you to question that, assess it, because nobody else.
Well, I think you just did. I think you just did it very effectively, Pedro. And I'm sorry we're hitting the break here at the end of the hour, but you know we're out of time. But yeah, absolutely, Trump is all about white people. He has been his whole entire life. He makes it very, very clear, and I think America is figuring that out. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabi.com. Gabi takes the pain out of insurance shopping. More info at Gabi.com/Tom. Bowl and Branch Sheets, crafted for the common good. More info at bowlandbranch.com, code Tom. CB Distillery for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Tom. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. And Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more information, teethhealth.com, code Tom.
We say fight back!
4-hour Thom Hartmann Book Club excerpt today. We're reading from Ed Morales' new book, Fantasy Island, Colonialism, Exploitation, and the Betrayal of Puerto Rico. This is from the first chapter. There was never any doubt that the United States wanted Puerto Rico for its own when it began a war with Spain near the turn of the 20th century. Cuba had been in the throes of independence war with Spain off and on since 1868, and the conflict that began in 1895 seemed ripe for the United States to capitalize on. The sinking of the USS Maine, an American naval ship destroyed by an explosion while moored just outside Havana, fueled American entry into the war. Although there are conflicting theories about the source of the explosion, including the likelihood it was caused by a spontaneous internal fire, William Randolph Hearst's newspaper chain blew up the incident into the perfect catalyst for the United States to enter the conflict. When Theodore Roosevelt entered the fray with his army of Rough Riders, the whole affair came as no surprise to anyone who'd been paying attention to the lust U.S. government leaders and military had long expressed to expand southward and westward. And although the idea of manifest destiny was at the forefront of the political discourse of this period, it's less often observed that the United States' expansionist gaze was saturated with racial language and attitudes, at once desirous of and repelled by Latin America's mestizo mulatto social dynamic. The Haitian Revolution at the end of the 19th century and into the 20th created a U.S. obsession with both Cuba and Puerto Rico because of the potential of a similar black-led revolt on those islands. In 1826, Virginia Senator John Randolph feared that such a revolt would render the southern United States vulnerable to invasion from Cubans in rowboats. For this reason, he objected to the United States participating in the 1826 Panama Congress because American diplomats would have to endure the horror of a U.S. diplomat taking his seat in the Congress, quote, beside the native African, their American descendants, the mixed breeds, the Indians, and the half-breeds, without any offense or scandal that's so motley a mixture, end quote. The logic driving this perspective underlined not only the importance of slavery to the emergence of capitalism in the 19th century, but also, as Matthew Karp points out in this vast Southern empire, the extent to which slave owners and their elected representatives disproportionately shaped U.S. foreign policy. Going back as far as the Haitian Revolution, fear of a successful slave rebellion in the newly formed United States strongly motivated Southern politicians. As Karp mentions, to that end, Presidents Madison and Monroe, quote, used overwhelming force to destroy black maroon settlements in southern Florida, end quote. Fear of slave rebellions also briefly united the interests of American slaveholders and Cuban elites who wanted independence from Spain, but in the late 19th century, after abolition, Roosevelt's forces fought in conjunction with Afro-Cuban armies against their common Spanish foe. The move to wrest Cuba and Puerto Rico from Spain came just as Spain had finally relented to end slavery as a concession to black rebel Cuban armies that had formed to push for independence. In a further move to placate continued unrest on the island, in November 1897, Spain signed automatic charters for Cuba and Puerto Rico, which gave limited home rule governments to both islands. Puerto Rico would gain full representation in the Cortes, the Spanish parliament, and could veto Spanish commercial treaties unfavorable to them while also retaining the rights to set tariffs on imports and exports. In this way, Puerto Ricans were granted a kind of citizenship that allowed self-government grafted on what was left of their Spanish subjecthood. Yet on July 25th, 1898, 8 days after the first meeting of the newly formed Puerto Rican parliament, U.S. troops arrived in the southern port of Guanica and replaced the Spanish flag with the stars and stripes. This date would be remembered over 50 years later when the United States finally followed through on a project to allow Puerto Ricans to have limited autonomy and self-government. But at the time, it was both the end of Teddy Roosevelt's splendid little war and the beginning of the current quandary over what exactly Puerto Rico's new colonial master would do with the island. Although historians agree that there was no pre-existing plan for designating Puerto Rico's status, there was a general belief that Puerto Rico could be incorporated as a U.S. territory and probably would be. This led many to assume that it would follow a similar path to statehood as former territories like Florida and Louisiana. At the very least, it would, by acceding to military control, receive, quote, the advantages and blessings of enlightened civilization, end quote, as Puerto Rico's first military governor, Nelson A. Miles, declared 3 days after the landing of Guanica. Because Cuba was so militarized during its wars for independence, the United States decided to allow it national sovereignty, thinking it could still exert considerable control over the economy because of existing business interests and a ready-made set of Cuban consumers who were already buying Ford Model Ts. But although Puerto Rico had experienced anti-Spanish uprisings in the mid-19th century, in 1898 they did not have nearly the same level of armed mobilization present. So the United States held on to it, particularly because of its geographic location, which would provide the United States with a stronghold on the easternmost tip of the Caribbean. The book is Fantasy Island by Ed Morales.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and talking about the United States of War in this hour. Professor David Vine to kick us off here. He's a professor with the Department of Anthropology at American University, the author of a brand new book, The United States of War, A Global History of America's Endless Conflicts from Columbus to the Islamic State. For those of you watching us on television or Free Speech TV, Dish, Direct, YouTube, whatever, it's over my shoulder here. Professor Vine, welcome to the program, first of all. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. David S. Vine, by the way, is Professor Vine's Twitter handle if you want to reach out to him. Professor Vine, how would you characterize the United States' relationship to war compared to most other developed nations?
Well, that's a hard question. I think the best comparison is probably to compare the United States to other empires. One of the things that was a surprise to me when I started my research was that the past 19 years of war, in which the United States has been fighting continuously since the U.S. military invaded Afghanistan in October 2001, is not exceptional in U.S. history. That if you look at the whole scope of U.S. history, the U.S. military has been fighting in all but 11 years of U.S. history in some form of war or other combat. And that's about 95% of the years in U.S. history. In recent years, though, I think it is probably the best comparison to look at the U.S. track record when it comes to war. The increasing people frighteningly talking about a war between the United States and China or a growing Cold War with China. China last fought a war outside its borders in 1979. The book is far from an argument in favor of Chinese foreign policy or anything about China. The book is really looking carefully at why the United States government has so consistently sent its military to fight in foreign lands. And ultimately, I hope the book makes some contribution to making U.S. foreign policy a far more peaceful endeavor.
Well, I know in my lifetime, I was a little kid when Dwight Eisenhower called out the military-industrial complex. There's money to be made in war. That's obviously, an incentive for the United States to go to war, or at least to prepare for war. And the military-industrial complex is no slouch when it comes to lobbying. Then also you've got presidents who think that being a wartime president, George W. Bush made this comment to Mickey Herskowitz, his biographer that his parents had hired to ghostwrite his autobiography, a charge to keep. This is in 1999, a year before he was nominated to run for president. And he said, if I become president, I'm going to have a war in Iraq, and it's not going to last 3 days like my dad did. He blew his political capital. I'm going to have a war that lasts until the next election so I can get reelected, which he did. So, clearly, and Donald Trump on multiple occasions when Barack Obama was running for reelection in 2012, tweeted that he was expecting Obama to start a war at any moment because that's how American presidents get reelected. So those are two clear forces. I'm lacking a word here, but things that would incline us toward war, I suppose, internally. What else is there?
Well, I think you pointed to two of the big ones. That economic and political interests have been major drivers behind this history of war, both recent wars and the whole long history of U.S. wars. That the military-industrial complex, in particular, that President Eisenhower warned us against as he was leaving office, has only grown in power since the time of Eisenhower, and really has taken on sort of Dr. Strange-Levian significance and power. Just look at the size of the U.S. military budget now, around $740 billion a year. And what are the threats that face us today? They are nothing like that facing us during the Cold War, when there was another empire, the Soviet Union, facing off against the U.S. government. Meanwhile, our military budget has reached the heights of the Cold War. Indeed, politicians, frighteningly, both before when they're running for president and when they are in office, see the power of war and the U.S. American psyche. They see the political advantage to be gained from launching wars, which again is a much longer term pattern. I think we also have to pay attention to the role of race and racism. That if you look at the pattern of war, the U.S. military has been invading the lands almost exclusively of people of color around the world, and racism you can see as a clear through line from the earliest wars against Native American peoples to the peoples in Afghanistan and Iraq. And if you just look at the kinds of slurs that sadly U.S. military personnel frequently use to describe Iraqis or Afghans, they are eerily familiar and similar to those used against Native American peoples, to those used against Filipinos during the war between 1899 and 1913. So racism, as well as gender and the desire to sort of demonstrate one's masculinity, are other really critical factors in explaining this long pattern of war.
And do you recall what the what the Pentagon budget was at the end of the Clinton administration? My recollection was it was around $350 billion. It was about half of what it is now. Am I remembering right?
That's exactly right. There was, at the end of the Cold War, there was a call for a peace dividend, and there were some significant reductions in the size of the military budget and the number of U.S. military bases abroad. But basically, the system of war continued after the Cold War. There was no structural transformation. It just sort of shrunk a bit in size, but the basic structure of war, including the general power of the military-industrial complex, remained in place. And that, I think, is part of what needs to change now, and beginning with people in the United States demanding a peace dividend again. I think we only need to look at the COVID pandemic to see that all this spending, literally trillions of dollars spent on war since 2001, $6.4 trillion on the war on terror since 2001, has not protected us against COVID, has not protected us against pandemics. Our priorities have been totally out of whack with the needs of people in the United States and around the world.
And the threats that we're facing. This morning, I believe it was in the Financial Times, there was a piece about how China is leaking news about how they're building up their military forces on the parts of their coast that face Taiwan, and that they may be anticipating a military incursion in Taiwan. And I'm reading this wondering, what does this mean for U.S. foreign policy? It sounds, given this context, it might be another opportunity to ramp things up. In the 45 seconds we have left before we hit a hard break here, Professor David Vine, what can we do? What can the average American do to try to stop this madness?
Well, I think we have to demand. Yeah, I think we have to demand our money back. We have to stop what Eisenhower described as the theft of our money and the allocation of our tax dollars to the military-industrial complex, and to redirect money toward taking care of the real threats that face us and the real human needs when it comes to our education, our health care, while demanding that U.S. leaders not lead us into yet another war with anyone, least of all China.
Yeah, I'm with you. Professor David Vine with the Department of Anthropology at American University. His new book, The United States of War, A Global History of America's Endless Conflicts from Columbus to the Islamic State. It's brilliant. David Vine, thank you so much for dropping by.
Thank you so much, Tom. I really appreciate it.
Good talking with you. We'll be right back. It's 15 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around. And welcome back. Marilyn in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida. Hey, Marilyn, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I just wanted to run by you something that Michael Cullen said a few weeks ago on television. He said that all of that negative information, all the stories that the Inquirer put out in 2016 about Hillary Clinton when she was dying and all other kinds of stuff, he said that Trump personally approved all of those stories. Now, doesn't that amount to another campaign contribution violation? A violation?
No, I don't think so. Donald Trump was the candidate, so it makes sense that he would be approving.
No, I mean he's getting publicity against Hillary Clinton to benefit himself with the help of the Inquirer, and he's actually inputting and saying yes, put that out there.
Oh, his coordination with the National Enquirer. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, David Pecker was being investigated for that before Bill Barr came on the job. To the best of my knowledge, ever since Bill Barr has been Attorney General, those investigations have either been killed or they're in a state of suspended animation.
So maybe they'll come back if Trump gets out. The other thing I wanted to quickly run by you, you may have already talked about this, but do you see Trump possibly resigning if he loses and letting Pence take over and pardon him and his cronies and not going to the inauguration and so forth, which he doesn't want to do, I'm sure? Do you see that happening possibly?
I do. I think that the odds are better than 50% that will happen. I noted that in the previous hour, and I think it makes perfect sense. Trump needs to make sure that he doesn't have federal charges. He's going to have enough state charges, and he's got major bankruptcies coming down the road. His kids are all, running the grift as hard and as fast as they can. I got 6 fundraisers from various entities associated with Donald Trump, all of whom got my email address from the one contribution that I made to the Trump campaign back in 2015. I got 6 fundraising emails within about a 4-hour window this morning. These guys, they are draining the checking accounts of probably mostly elderly Fox News viewers who are their base. And I think it's just an absolute tragedy. And but this is what they're doing. And I think
by the way, quickly, I just wanted to say that I heard on TV that Florida has purged over 100,000 felons who were on the voting rolls who have not paid their fines.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me. Or there's 100,000 who are eligible or would be eligible had they paid their fines. And paying the fines, by the way, it sure does seem to me like a violation of the constitutional amendment that prohibits poll taxes.
Well, the first court decision agreed with you, but then an appeals court came along and said, no, it's okay.
Then it went to a Trump court. And increasingly, we're going to see this, Marilyn. We're going to see, in particular, courts of appeals that, circuit courts that are turning down, or not necessarily turning down, that are basically choosing cases and ruling in cases that work to the benefit of the traditional donors to the Republican Party, billionaires and big corporations, and that screw the traditional supporters of the Democratic Party, working people, unions, consumers, and the environment. And it's just going to get worse and worse, and I think that we're going to be hitting a breaking point in the next couple of years. And, we need to get ready. That's why I wrote that book on the Supreme Court, because there are solutions, there are remedies. Marilyn, thank you for the call. Your points are very, very well taken. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. You can help America return to democracy by telling friends and family how to listen to this and other great progressive programs. Tag You're It. So we've got a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for the folks who support our program, and it's about exactly why rich people, I'm talking about people who make more than $1 million a year marginally, and over $3 million a year, that group totally, why this group of people who are multi-millionaires and are literally bringing into the house over $1 million a year and over $3 million a year, why would they want to destroy Obamacare? Turns out there's a very simple answer, and a very straightforward answer, and a rather shocking answer, that they would put all this time and effort, years of work, into trying to kill Obamacare and throw 20, 30, 40,000 million people, off their health care. And you can see it, hear it, read all about it, as it were, over at thomhartmann.com in our new members-only video. And welcome back. A few other things in the news. A watchdog group has accused Amy Coney Barrett of, this is accountable.us is the watchdog group. Kyle Herrig, the president, issued this news release. He said, after a 19-year-old pregnant prison inmate was repeatedly raped by a prison guard, Amy Coney Barrett ruled that the county responsible for the prison could not be held liable because the sexual assaults, the repeated rapes by the guard, fell outside the realm of the guard's official duties. She had sued the county for $6.7 million for the harm inflicted upon her by this guard in this prison where she was an inmate, repeatedly raping her. And Amy Coney Barrett said, sorry, you don't get a penny. And the reason why was because nowhere in the manual for that guard's job does it say that part of his job is raping inmates. And therefore, the prison and the state and everybody else, they have no responsibility for this. No problem. No problem. It's incredible. I mean, I guarantee you, as more stuff comes out, we're going to be seeing more and more of the just casual cruelty of conservatives like Amy Coney Barrett. It's epidemic. Brian in Anaheim. Hey, Brian, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I'm just horrified about what you just said about the rape by the prison guard. That's wow. But the reason I was calling is I've heard
it wasn't part of his job description.
Wow. Oh, boy. But I've heard criminal negligence, and I believe even the term criminally negligent homicide mentioned with regards to Trump several times in this show with reference to COVID. Are you familiar with the criminal charge of felony murder?
Well, I think that the definitions vary slightly from state to state, but broadly, yeah. Why?
But my understanding is, at least in some states, if a death occurs, accidental or not, as a direct result of a felony being committed, then the felon can be prosecuted for murder even under the felony murder charge. And
right. If you and three buddies walk into a bank to rob the bank and one of your buddies shoots the guard, all four of you are guilty of felony murder in almost every state. Yes.
And isn't conspiracy to commit kidnapping a felony?
You're talking about the guys in Michigan and Governor Gretchen Whitmer?
No, I'm talking about the kids and being held in cages and being separated from their parents. That's at the border. Oh. That's kidnapping. And I know there have been.
Well, it's kidnapping under color of law. That's incarceration. Actually, it's not kidnapping. And I think that there is, technically, some at least of those folks have violated the law by coming into the United States without permission. Now, the treaties that we have signed that have to do with refugees say that refugees can present themselves anywhere inside a country. They don't have to ask permission to get into the country. But the Trump administration is saying that these people are not refugees, that they are immigrants, that they are seeking, a better life and work as opposed to fleeing, terror. And therefore, they can be treated as if they were immigrants. And so they're playing games with legal loopholes. But I don't think that you would have any success trying to say that it's kidnapping. It's just wrong.
I would love to. I would love to see a DA, I would love to see a DA in some regard go after, because he's been responsible for so many deaths, and that seems like it seems like there would be a felony that could be linked to one of these deaths that Trump could be charged with, the directing of that felony. If the kidnapping was the one that
criminal negligence. The way that they're packing these kids into these cages and not providing them with health care and things like that. Most of the kids that have died when they were sick. They had the flu, things like that. Brian, thank you for the call. Mary in Wichita Falls, Texas. Hey, Mary, what's up?
Yes, I just wanted to touch briefly that I had seen over my Twitter feed a couple of days ago a post regarding the Navajo Nation. The people there desperately need rides to go vote. So Tati Blue, at Tati Blue Wave, said Navajo Nation needs right to vote. Can anyone help? And then at Claire Ortiz responded, please, anyone near the Navajo Nation, please get folks to the polls. I'll help pay for gas. Seriously, please do all retreat and gather the troops. The reason I called you today is because you have a very large platform, and maybe it could be something you could discuss with the people who listen to you, and perhaps we can mobilize some type of assistance out there so that one of the, our indigenous peoples can get to the vote and get to the polls and have their voice actually heard during this election.
That's a good one. Mary, if you would tweet that tweet to me so that I can pull it out from your tweet and retweet it. I've got 120,000 Twitter followers for what it's worth. I would be glad to do that as soon as the program's over.
Absolutely.
So you might
I'll get my house and do that.
wait 15 minutes to do it, but so go ahead.
And last, very quickly, you piqued my interest when you said that you donated to the Trump campaign in 2015. Would it be possible to pick your brain as to why?
Sure. I gave Donald Trump $5 in 2015 when he was running the Republican primary to get on his email list. I also gave $5 to several other Republican candidates and to several Democratic candidates. It's one of the things that I do to get on their list. Mary, thanks for the call. We'll be right back.
What I figured. Thank you so much. I'll get
202-808-9925.
Back with more of your calls and the news of the day right after this. Stick around.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Cokeland, The Secret History of Coke Industries and Corporate Power in America by Christopher Leonard. This is from the preface. On May 18th, 1981, 4 Wall Street bankers traveled to Wichita, Kansas. They went there to make an offer to Charles Koch, the CEO of an obscure mid-size energy company. The bankers from Morgan Stanley wanted to convince Koch to take his family's company public, offering shares for sale on the New York Stock Exchange. Their deal was squarely in line with the conventional wisdom of corporate America at the time. Going public was seen as a natural progression for companies like Koch Industries, offering them access to big pools of money and promising enormous paydays for the existing team of executives. All it required from the CEO was to surrender control. Morgan Stanley, in return, would collect a small fortune in fees. Charles Koch was 45 years old. He had run Koch Industries since he was 32 when his father died suddenly. He was trim, tall, and had an athlete's build. He spoke quietly in meetings and seemed almost passive. The bankers laid out their plan to take Koch public. They revealed what, to most executives at least, might have been the most significant detail. If Charles Koch agreed to the deal, he could earn $20 million overnight. The bankers seemed incredulous when they prepared a confidential memo about Koch's reaction. He does not want this cash, the memo reported. Charles Koch calmly explained to them why their offer made no sense. His company was breathtakingly profitable. It operated in vital, deeply complex corners of the American energy industry. During the 1980s, Koch Industries was the largest purchaser and transporter of U.S. crude oil. It owned an oil refinery. It employed teams of commodity traders who bought and sold a wildly diverse menu of raw materials and financial products, from gasoline to paper futures contracts. This might have encouraged most CEOs to take their company public. Koch Industries, however, did not want outsiders to know how much money its traders were earning. Taking the company public would expose too many of its secrets. The memo said, certain of Koch's commodity traders are particularly worried that their high salaries, once disclosed to the public, would be used against them by their trading partners. Secrecy was a strategic necessity for Koch Industries. Charles Koch did not want to surrender it. He also didn't want to surrender control. He had a specific, clear vision of how to run his company, and he didn't need Wall Street investors to interfere. If the bankers expected Charles Koch to go along with the conventional wisdom of their time, then they, like so many outsiders, did not understand him. Beneath his low-key veneer, Charles Koch was, at his core, a fighter. He had unmovable ideas about how things should be, and he did not back down when challenged. When he was challenged by his own brothers for control of Koch Industries, he fought them in a bitter legal battle that lasted decades. When he was challenged by members of a powerful labor union during his first years as CEO, he fought them even as they committed an act of industrial sabotage that nearly destroyed Koch's oil refinery. When the FBI and the U.S. Department of Justice launched a criminal investigation into Koch Industries' oil gathering business, Charles Koch fought them with every legal and political tool at his disposal. When a liberal Congress and President Barack Obama sought to impose regulations on the fossil fuel industry to control greenhouse gas emissions, Charles Koch fought them in ways that changed U.S. politics. In each of these fights, Charles Koch prevailed. When Charles Koch dismissed the bankers in 1981, it was just a small skirmish in the larger war to control Koch Industries. After prevailing in that fight, he created a company that was true to his vision. He avoided the snares that entangled many publicly traded companies that report their financial results to investors every 3 months. Koch Industries didn't have to think quarter to quarter. The company thinks year to year. An internal think tank and deal-making committee called the Development Group will sometimes think through a business deal on a timeline measured in decades. This long-term view made Koch more nimble where other companies stumbled. In 2003, for example, Koch Industries bought a group of money-losing fertilizer plants when no publicly traded company was willing to take the risk. Today, those plants are as profitable as a broken ATM machine that spews out cash around the clock. Unlike publicly traded companies, Koch Industries does not pay out rich dividends to investors. Charles Koch insists on reinvesting at least 90% of the company's profits, fueling its constant expansion. This strategy laid the foundation for decades of continuous growth. Koch Industries expanded continuously by purchasing other companies and branching out into new industries. It specialized in the kind of businesses that are indispensable to modern civilization, but which most consumers never directly encounter. The company is embedded in the hidden infrastructure of everyday life. Millions of people use Koch's products without ever seeing Koch's name attached. Koch refines and distributes fossil fuels, from gasoline to jet fuel, on which the global economy is dependent. Koch is the world's third largest producer of nitrogen fertilizer, which is the cornerstone of our modern food system. Koch makes the synthetic materials used in baby diapers, waistbands, and carpets. It makes the chemicals used for plastic bottles and pipes. It owns Georgia Pacific, which makes the wall panels, beams, and plywood required to build homes and office buildings. It makes napkins, paper towels, stationery, newspaper, and personal hygiene products. Koch Industries owns a network of commodities trading offices in Houston, Moscow, Geneva, and elsewhere, which are the circulatory system of modern finance. The book, Kochland, by Christopher Leonard.
Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program.
So for our Thom Hartmann Insider videotape that is over, or videotape, YouTube, whatever you want to call it, private video that's available over at ThomHartmann.com, I'm talking this week about Donald Trump just completely giving in to Erdogan of Turkey, the president of Turkey, the dictator of Turkey now, and this theory that Jared Kushner okayed the killing, at least the capture, perhaps the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, and to Mohammed bin Salman, and that Erdogan has the tape of it. And that when he called up Donald Trump a couple weeks ago and said, I want you to pull out of Syria and give me those Kurds so I can kill them and take that land, that he did it because Erdogan threatened him. And then Erdogan comes to the United States, a week or two later and gets a whole state dinner thing. Check it all out. It's over at ThomHartmann.com. I think you'll find it fascinating.
Oh, one last note as just kind of going through the pile of the news of the day that I wanted to share with you. There is a company in Ohio that the Ohio Republican-run Ohio government hired to print ballots. They're printing them for a bunch of eastern Ohio counties and parts of western Pennsylvania. It's the company's called Midwest Direct. It's owned by two brothers. One of them is a guy named Richard Gebbe. This is from an article in the New York Times, by the way, over the weekend, October 16, by Reed J. Epstein. This summer, reading from the New York Times article, this summer this is Richard and his brother, the Gebbe brothers, who own Midwest Direct, this printing and mailing company. This summer, they began flying a Trump 2020 flag above Midwest Direct's headquarters on the west side of Cleveland. We have freedom to vote for who we want and support who we want, Richard Gebbe said in an interview last month. We fly a flag because my brother and I own the company and we support President Trump. So they got the contract to print these absentee ballots and to mail them out to people. A lot of these direct mail companies, they do both. They do the printing and the mailing all in one facility. So here's the story. Several Ohio counties that expected absentee ballots printed by the company to land in voter mailboxes are now scrambling to print them themselves. In Pennsylvania, for instance, nearly 30,000 ballots were sent to voters in Allegheny County, which includes Pittsburgh, to the wrong address. Pittsburgh, a largely Democratic city. 30,000 ballots went to the wrong addresses. The county had provided the company with lists of tens of thousands of requests weeks in advance. Midwest Direct is the primary outside provider for absentee ballots in 16 Ohio counties. Several Ohio counties that expected absentee ballots printed by the company to land in voters' mailboxes are now scrambling. Gee, who could have predicted this? That a printing company that normally does just great work on time and is flying a Trump 2020 flag, when given the job of printing ballots that are going to go into largely Democratic cities in Ohio and Pennsylvania, somehow screwed the job up, and the ballots never went out, and the ones that did go out went to the wrong people. Who could have imagined? Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Dave, you wanted to put a punctuation mark on our conversation about endless war with Dr. Vine?
Yeah, for one thing, I just want to compliment you on getting Dr. Vine on there. I have never heard, someone that's interested in this topic bring up the topic of racism when it comes to warfare. I mean, that's deep and it's controversial, right?
Oh, it's very real. It's very real. I mean, during Vietnam, it was all, there were all those words, I'm not going to say any of them on the air, but all those words to describe Vietnamese in Afghanistan and Iraq, it's raghead and other slurs that I'd rather not say on the air. I remember my dad, who straight out of high school joined the Army to go fight in World War II. And to his dying days, he referred to Japanese as Japs and Germans as Krauts, which are not quite as racist as a lot of the other phrases that were used. But, I mean, this is just... anyway, back to you, Dave. Sorry.
That's okay. Well, the necessity, most people assume that it's a necessity to dehumanize your enemy in order to do your job, because part of your job is killing, So and they think that's a necessity to dehumanize, but it's not really. But that's not the reason why I called. I have put a lot of thought into this. All right. My 25 years of military service. I mean, I became very disenchanted under George W. Bush administration because I noticed these wars were getting, there's so much incentive to do war. I mean, there's so much monetary incentive, and our economy has been slowly and rigorously just declining. And so here's what you can't really be anti-war. Like, God bless you, Tom, you were anti-war. You can't really be like that anymore because, like in your face with the anti-war message. Because, number one, like I said, the incentive. And then number two is, you're going to seem weak. That's how they're going to portray it, like they're doing with the defund the police movement. It's all weakness. And we don't want to make America weak. But here's the thing. I think everyone will buy off on this. What we have to do is we have to get rid of the redundancy. Like, for instance, we have a CIA and a DIA. Both of those things are redundant. And the reason why they're redundant is because there's such a monetary incentive. And then we need to shift things back from the free market, contractor realm back into the military. Like, for instance, there's no reason why the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Marines couldn't have a barber. You can have barbers. I mean, they used to years ago. Now, the problem with that, the problem with that is it's going to seem, they're going to say socialism, socialism, socialism. But look, Tom, you always say it so correctly. The most socialist organization in the United States is the military. And, it goes all the way back to the only, single-payer plan we had was Champus with health care, and it worked great. Contractors.
Oh, George Washington put one into place. George Washington ordered the vaccination of everybody in the American military during the Revolutionary War. And then once he became president, they created the first single-payer healthcare system for sailors, including civilian sailors, merchant marines. I mean, it's like, so there's a history here. Dave, I got to tell you, just a real quick story. Back in the 80s, when Lamar Waldron and I were working on these 2 books on the Kennedy assassination that we published, Legacy of Secrecy is the main one. We tracked down and I interviewed a fellow by the name of Harry Enrique Ruiz Williams, who was one of the 2 commanders of the Bay of Pigs invasion. And that invasion, was a disaster. But Harry had worked out a deal with a fellow by the name of Juan Almeida, who was the head of the Cuban military, who was going to, if we could just get somebody in to assassinate Castro, Almeida was going to lead a military coup and take over Cuba on behalf of the United States. And Harry, after Jack was assassinated, Harry went into, along with Bobby. Bobby was funding this thing, and Bobby had helped put this thing together. Harry and Harry told me this story personally. We had dinner together, and he had a few drinks, and Harry and Bobby went into Lyndon Johnson's office. This was like just a month or so after the Kennedy assassination, and said, "We still have this operation in place. Commander Almeida is still the head of the military in Cuba. He is still willing to overthrow Castro. And we still have agents inside Cuba. We can do this the right way if you'll just give the authorization." And Johnson, having gotten burned, Kennedy having gotten burned with the Bay of Pigs invasion, just went into this loud, obscene tirade about Cuba and Cubans and how he didn't want to have anything to do with it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then he ended this by saying to Harry and to Bobby Kennedy, saying, "I'm going to make my stand against communism as far the hell away as I can get. I'm going to do it in effing Vietnam. I don't want to be fighting communists in Cuba. I'll do it in Vietnam to get my anti-communist credentials if that's what I have to do." And, what it really, and he did, and that led directly to our involvement in Vietnam and by the escalation of it. And it was all because Johnson was afraid that the Republicans of that time were going to criticize him for being soft on communism. I mean, that's, and 57,000 Americans and 2 million Vietnamese died as a result of that. That's how bizarre our foreign policy has become. Back to you, Dave. You got the last minute before the break.
No, you're right. It is completely bizarre. Now, all you really have to do is substitute the communist scare, the Red Scare, with the Islam scare and Islamophobia. I mean, it's not rational, Tom. I'm telling you. I mean, I could talk about it for hours. I could write a book on it, but it is completely not rational. And you might even say, well, who cares? You're a devout Christian or whatever. You should be anti-Islam. Right, but you shouldn't, advocate killing and toppling governments and forming an empire, because you know what? To be quite honest with you, it's way, way too expensive. All right, and I don't even care what Donald Trump says. I mean, look, he was railing on a Islamic terror incident in Paris over the weekend to the joy and ecstasy of his followers, and also, he Russia's in Venezuela, for crying out loud. I mean, he's not putting Russia or anybody in check. He's made Russia a world power again. Yeah, of course he has. Dave, thanks for the call. I mean, he's help out the people who put you in office, right? I mean, why not? Amazing. It's 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be back. When does the madness end? Well, I think when the people who are sane start stepping up. That's us.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
45 minutes past the hour. Back with your calls in just a moment. Stick around. And welcome back. David in Spotswood, New Jersey. Hey, David, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
Hi. I just wanted to call in support of Ro Khanna, and I know how specifically the Dems could get a deal if they would only show a little bit of courage, or full thousand courage. The SALT repeal that the Democrats desperately want, it's nonsense, because before there was the $10,000.
Wait a minute, the SALT repeal. Are you talking about the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty?
No, I'm talking about state and local tax, the $10,000 limit.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I got it. Yeah, right.
Let me be very quick and very frank. Before we had the Tax Cut Job Act that Trump passed at the end of 2017, you were able to deduct your state and local taxes in full. However, most people in the Northeast and in the blue states or whatever got alternative minimum tax because of it. So net, it really wasn't a tax increase for people in the blue states. Now, I don't know why they passed it. Maybe for psychological reasons to force people to move out of blue states or to hurt blue states. But net, it really wasn't a tax increase in limiting the SALT tax.
Well, it entirely depends on your personal tax profile. I mean, if you've got there are
taxes causes alternative minimum tax. Everyone
not necessarily. It depends on what your income is.
No. If you have a high state and local tax, you have a high income. The state and local tax caused the alternative minimum tax. It wasn't really a tax increase. And then the repeal of it, in support of Arcana, in the repeal of the SALT limitation, that's $135 billion. So if the Democrats concede that, then accept the state grant that the Republicans are giving, we're much closer to a deal.
So what's your point, David? What am I missing here?
My point is that we shouldn't have to wait to February and have people starving on the street or getting evicted from their houses. The Democrats should have the intelligence or the fortitude to give up on the SALT repeal. Or somebody should point out that there was never really a deduction in the first place because Trump got rid of.
Are you suggesting the SALT repeal is the thing that's holding up the coronavirus bill?
Well, it's 2.2 and the Republicans are 1.8 plus, and the SALT repeal is 135 billion.
Right.
So if you give
I don't think that has anything to do with what's holding it up, David. I think the Republican, that is not the Republican poison pill that Pelosi is talking about. That the Republican poison pill has to do with limitations of liability on employers and money for big corporations and no money for average people, or very little.
For 4 months?
Say what?
Couldn't we make a deal with the Republicans and have the liability protections just for 4 months until we get Democratic Congress?
The bill that the Republicans are pushing, that limitation on liability, by the way, would not simply be on employers who expose their employees to coronavirus. It would also be on any employer who puts any employee in any situation where they could get sick or die. And it's a huge umbrella for employers who treat their employees like crap. And that's why Nancy Pelosi is fighting it. God bless her. We'll be right back. The Hidden History of Monopoly tells how Robert Bork, that guy from the Reagan era, transformed corporate America and destroyed the American dream. Hey, we have a new video over at ThomHartmann.com for people who are supporters of our program. It is the 12 steps. Common Cause actually put these together, but I boiled them down into a nice little rant on a YouTube video that you could share with friends and neighbors and acquaintances who might be wondering, how did this coronavirus thing get so bad? Why is it that the United States has a third of the deaths in the world? Why do we have over 100,000 dead people and South Korea has 200 and Taiwan has like 70 and Australia has fewer than 100 and has pretty much squashed the virus? Why is it that only 7 people died in New Zealand? Why are so many other countries doing so well and we're not? Well, there's an answer to that question. And I lay it out in this little video. It's over at ThomHartmann.com and you can grab it there and share it with your friends. And I'll give you a clue. Almost all of it has to do with things that orange guy in the White House either did or failed to do, but it's a great list. You can check it out at ThomHartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Debbie in Sylvania, Ohio. Hey, Debbie, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I live in one of those counties in Ohio with Midwest as the vendor. Actually, I live in Lucas County, which is Toledo, so heavily Democratic county. And a couple things. One is that ballots were supposed to go out October 6th. So I check on October 7th. According to the records, my ballot was sent out. Everybody I know got the same record. However, Midwest hadn't sent any of them out, and our local Board of Elections tried to contact them for 2 days without response.
This is the printing company that's waving the Trump 2020 flag out in front.
Well, right? They took it down now, but but yeah, it's the same printing company, and reached them. Finally, when they did reach them, Midwest said they would send them out last week. The Board of Elections posted on Facebook on Wednesday that none had actually gone out on the 14th. Some must have gone out on the 13th because I have friends who received them on Friday. However, I have still not received mine. So, and I do know other people who haven't either. So it's, I think that when you were talking earlier in the program about what needs to be done, I think it needs to be a comprehensive investigation of all this voting issues and these vendors and having some law in place. Maybe the congressmen that two that you have on, maybe there can be some sort of federal legislation. I know it's done through the states, but this I think
is Mike
ridiculous.
DeWine still your governor, Debbie?
Oh yes.
Yeah, so why would the DeWine administration hire a Trump, a printing and mailing company flying a Trump 2020 flag to print and mail the ballots? It just seems like...
The states don't hire the contractors, the counties do. So why?
Okay, then why would any county be dumb enough?
I don't know. That's what I'd like to find out. And I don't know if it's every state, but in Ohio, by law, the Board of Elections has to have equal number of Republicans and Democrats. However, I did note there is no designation on the website. However, I do believe that the chair is a Republican. So I'm hoping the local paper, Toledo Blade, and our local, we have two TV stations that are pretty good. We also have one of the Sinclair stations, so I don't expect them to do any digging. I'm hoping they'll look into that more because it also happened, I understand, with Cuyahoga County, though, which is Cleveland, and that's a heavily Democratic county. I know they go with the lowest bidder, but...
No, I got it. Debbie, I've got to move along, but please, keep us up to date on how this goes and lean on your local media. I mean, this is important stuff. Debbie, thank you for the call. Susan in Snellville, Georgia. Hey, Susan. What's up?
Hey, Tom. I just wanted to call to tell y'all that please stop wanting to be deniers doing this because my husband is the 12th person of my family out of 85 people to get COVID. He's 40 years old. He's at the tail end of the 2-week period, and he literally just took his truck to go to the bank and come right back. He thought he was feeling better yesterday. And he just came back from a 10, 15-minute drive back and forth. And he's so exhausted, he had to sit on the bed and took 2 breaths of an inhaler. So this is no joke, and I just hope everybody takes it more seriously and mask up.
Yeah, there you go. Susan, this is a serious and deadly disease. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you
I have a lot of friends and family, though, unfortunately, that are just not taking it so seriously.
Yeah, and sadly, many of them are going to find out in a very, very difficult way what this is all about. Susan, thank you very much. Verna in Eugene, Oregon. Hey, Verna, we have a little less than a minute before the end of the show. You got a quick point?
I was just wondering if there was any safeguards in place for when Trump, or if Trump loses the election between then and the time that Biden would be inaugurated. So hopefully he doesn't cause a lot more problems.
There's a lot of damage he can do, Verna. There is a lot of damage he can do.
I know.
Not that he hasn't already done. Just it's going to take 20 years to undo the damage that he's done already. But that is my biggest concern. My biggest concern is not what happens on November 3rd or 4th or 5th, or it might take as much as a week or so to get all the election returns in. My biggest concern is what happens during the lame duck, what happens during the period of time when Trump is on his way out, assuming that he actually loses the election, which I think is, at this point, probably a safe assumption. But I made that assumption about Hillary Clinton back in the day, and I'm not going to make that mistake again. Thanks so much for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires every single one of us to participate. You can phone bank, go to indivisible.org. There's all kinds of cool stuff you can do, ways you can participate. Support the politicians that you like. And of course, double check your voter registration at iwillvote.com and vote. Tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabi.com. Gabi takes the pain out of insurance shopping. More info at Gabi.com/Tom. Bowl and Branch Sheets, crafted for the common good. More info at bowlandbranch.com, code Tom. CB Distillery for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Tom. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. And Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more information, teethhealth.com, code Tom.